I'm able to ride a little, we will depart here. I will go to Ashmark and heal there further, while the army continues. If they would have to wait on me, we would lose too much momentum. Who will lead? He asked, afraid of the answer that would come. You will. Rob replied dryly, as his blue eyes looked deeply into his own grey ones. Rob, I can't, the Northmen might accept, but the Riverlanders will never serve under a bastard. The phrase might start a mutiny, he complained, fearful of being the cause the campaign would start failing. The phrase will fall in line, or I will order Lord Ricard to burn the twins down to the ground, his brother replied angrily. The Northmen will follow you, as will the Blackwoods and the Deadings, if I ask them to. Maybe, but the phrase control over a fifth of the 3,000 men we have here. A lot of loyal Northerners are scattered around the Westerlands with Harry, Lord Galbart, the Great Yon or Lady Mage. If the phrase don't listen to me, the whole force would be hamstrung. Not for long. I intend to give the phrase and 150 of their number the garrison of the crag. This will weaken Blackwalder and Sir Ryman's grip on our force and give their house some perceived honor. Besides, by that point I expect the Great Yon to rejoin us with his men. They are loyal to a fault, so don't expect any problems. The presence of the boisterous giant soothed his fears somewhat, and so he nodded. His brother's plan would work, and he would need to learn how to lead an army. After a while she speaks up. Today I will tell you about the story of Alis Karstark, my namesake, the Lady of Winterfell. She married Lord Brandon Stark, the son of Lord Cregan, the Old Man of the North, when she was 16 years old. Alis started her tale and he felt the excitement raise in his stomach. Chapter 28, Squids, Wolves and Moose. 299 AC. Harleys. He looked upon the grey granite walls of Winterfell as he passed through the main gate. Behind him rode the army returning from Hornwood, augmented with his own troops. They numbered 600 men in total. They would group themselves here together with the Sowins, who would arrive soon under their new lord. Clee Sowin was a young man, close to the age of his late son. Where he had lost his son in the Whispering Wood, Lord Clee had lost his father at the Green Fork. He looked forward to meeting the new lord, as fostering good relations with House Sowin might be important to his house. As it stood now, they only had an alliance with House Marndale and House Tallheart. With his plans to make Lance his heir, they would lose the Marndales by the next generation. If he wanted his son to reign safely and resist House Bolton, he would need to make friends for him. House Sowin was an ideal candidate for this. The only benefit was that Lance would have the friendship of House Glover through his fostering. That would go a long way, but he would need friends closer at home. The Sowins and their close allies the Castles could provide this in the future. During the battle and the following march he had become friends of some sort with Sir Roderick, the head of House Castle. Maybe he could ask to foster the man's grandnephew at Hornwood after the war. It would also be a nephew of Lord Clee and could better their relations. He could also make use of it so that the Starks, Sowins and Marndales would be willing to connect the Hornwood to their bettered infrastructure. This would bring much needed coin and prosperity to his lands. As he rode into the inner courtyard, he saw that the Stark family had arrayed themselves to greet him. He greatly appreciated the gesture and puffed his chest out a little. Next to him rode Sir Roderick as he looked on stoically. He looked over the people who had come to greet him. In the middle stood his queen Alis Stark, formerly Karstark. He had to give it to old Ricard, the man had managed to accomplish much in his lifetime for his family. If not for Robb Stark, he might have tried to betroth her to Darin. How fate can turn out in strange ways, he thought as he looked upon the girl that was his queen. The queen showed very visible signs of pregnancy and he was glad for it. Another Stark would always be welcomed in the north. At the queen's right stood Lady Catelyn, always the gracious beauty and host. Next to her stood her sons Rickon and Brandon, the latter being the king's heir for now. At the queen's other side stood Ned's daughters. The eldest clearly resembling her mother, while the youngest made him think back to Lyanna Stark. He had once thought about asking for the youngest daughter's hand for Darin, but it had always been unlikely that Ned would accept. Now with Lyance's bastardy he had no chance they would ever accept. He would have to find his son a cousin from a lesser branch or the daughter of a masterly house. This would set his house back a bit, but it would at least legitimize their children in the eyes of the northern nobility. Maybe his grandchildren could make more advantageous marriages than he or his son. Welcome Lord Harleys and Sir Roderick, we thank you for your valiant efforts in defending the North against the brigands that plagued it. Lady Caitlin stated politely. This surprised him. Didn't everyone know it was the Boltons by now? Ha, brigands you say? Boltons I call them. I have the proof to back it up as well. We found many a Bolton livery after we raided their camp. I have even more witnesses. Women, who have experienced unspeakable things, have testified to the leader of their culprits being named Ramsay Snow, or Ramsay Bolton as he styled himself. Lord Roost's bastard son that has created problems before. He stated loudly as he got off his horse. He wanted the North to know of the Boltons' treachery. This clearly shocked the Stark family. The Queen seemed to believe him quickly enough, she was a Karstark after all. Her family was probably the only one that was confronted with the Boltons' acts as much as his own. Lady Caitlin looked unsure and she looked over to Sir Roderick in confirmation. The man nodded stiffly, and he saw Ned's widow swallow heavily. Whatever the case, we thank you for defeating them in battle, good lord, the young queen responded diplomatically. We welcome you and your men to Winterfell. You, Sir Roderick, and your commanders are invited to dine at our hall tonight, where a victory feast will be held in your honor. Meanwhile food and mead will be brought to your men as well. Thank you, your grace and my lady, he said sincerely as he bowed to Queen Alis and inclined his head to Lady Caitlin. The night passed in a blur. He talked a lot with both Lady Caitlin, as well as the young queen. He had also spent some time with the young Stark children, wanting to measure them. They all seemed quite nice children. The youngest boy and girl clearly reminding him of late Brandon and Lyanna. He smiled at the thought of the Stark blood running strong in some of them. The feast had been good. It had done wonders for the morale of his men. He himself yet again tried to regain the holdfast his grandfather had lost. This time he seemed to have more success. The holdfast now belonged to a house sworn to the Boltons, and this seemed to work in his favor. Although he wasn't promised it back outright, his queen promised to look into it. His other repeated requests of hunting rights and damning the white knife were rejected, however. All in all, he couldn't complain. As such, he was in a fine mood when he entered the Stark Solar the next morning. His mood wouldn't last though, as bad news was shared soon. We have had grave word from the front. It seems Benfred Tallheart, the foolhardy boy, had seen it fit on himself to go patrol the stony shore against the Ironborn with his company of wild hares. News came of his crushing defeat and death 4 days ago. The loss of manpower for the Tallhearts means that Torrens Square is a lot more vulnerable now. Yesterday a call for aid came from Leopold Tallheart, requesting aid against the Ironborn marching on his home. Lady Caitlin said from behind the desk. He thought about the news. The Ironborn winning a victory on the western coast wasn't good at all. It had already been under-defended, without the Tallheart the whole region could easily be terrorized by those squids. The death of Benfred did open some opportunities for his family though. Sir Helman Tallheart had no other sons and his brother Leopold was married to his sister. It was very likely that either his brother-in-law or his nephew Brandon would inherit Torrens Square and provide his house with a much-needed ally in the future. He did feel bad for Helman, no man deserved to lose a son so young. He had been a good boy too, but nothing could be done about that now. Just like nothing could ever be done about Darin anymore. Sir Roderick replied, if Torrens Square is under attack we must answer, my lady. I have some 200 men left from the battle at the Hornwood. If you give me a week's time, I can muster another 450 from Wintertown and the surrounding territory. I will deal with the treacherous Theon Greyjoy once and for all. We admire your courage and loyalty, Sir Roderick, but do you think that will be enough? The Ironborn number some 500 men. You would only slightly outnumber them. Lady Caitlin asked, clearly worried. The Ironborn's strength is on the seas, my lady. In the fields and forests of the north, our men have the clear advantage. I will not fail. Besides, I expect the new Lord Serwyn to join me with additional men, the knight answered without hesitation. I must agree with Sir Roderick, Lady Caitlin. However, before I state an alternative plan, I must ask you what news has come from Deepwood Motte. He said, thinking deeply about the military situation of the north. From what we know, they are still under siege, Lord Harley's. They are holding steady, together with the forces they had intended to send south to rob. The clans have answered and have said to start marching to break the siege. Lord Torrin Little has sent a vanguard, under his son and heir Morgan, to harass the Ironborn. They intend to stall the Ironborn so the main force arrives in time to free Deepwood Motte. Lady Catelyn answered his question. Good, very good. That means that I will not be needed up there, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. Lord Harley's. Aren't you planning to help the mountain clans anymore? His young queen asked him. By your leave, no, your grace. Sir Roderick's plan is sound, but it would leave Winterfell underdefended and I do not like that. Even if it's not under any immediate threat, it is a weak show of force to your bannermen. I would propose that Sir Roderick leaves 200 to 250 extra Stark men here and I will join him with my 300 men. This will increase our numerical advantage against the Ironborn, as well as its veterancy. Together with the troops of Lord Sewin we will probably outnumber them 2 to 1 and as such we can limit our losses. Did you not want to free your son, Lord Harley's? Lady Catelyn asked him. I did. However, if the clans say they are marching and will free the Motte, then I'm reassured. Besides, my sister and 2 nephews are in Torrens Square right now. I have a duty to help them as well. He replied easily. It would be good to help his sister and her family, even more so when he still needed to tell him about his decision to make Lyan's heir. This will work, my lady. Together with Lord Harley's and his veteran troops, we will be able to make short work of the Ironborn. Sir Roderick joined in, clearly liking the idea. Good, then that's decided. His queen said simply. When can you leave? I expect we may be able to leave in 4 to 5 days, your grace. Most of the men are already gathered and they are being trained here at Winterfell. The Sewins are only 1 day marching away. We just need to give Lord Clee a few days to gather his men and provisions before joining us here. Sir Roderick replied. Very well, I expect that the both of you will be able to take care of provisions yourself. Lady Catelyn asked. He couldn't do anything but notice that there seemed to be some tension between the 2 women about who gave the orders. It didn't matter for now, as they had been able to make a sound plan and both seemed to agree, but he would need to keep an eye on that in the future. Internal strife within House Stark was something the North needed right now. He simply replied, as Sir Roderick nodded. Good, then you are dismissed. If any problems arise, I expect you to notify me immediately. Lady Catelyn said, again giving him the idea that some small power struggling was happening between the women. He nodded his head to Lady Catelyn and made a small bow for his queen and left the solar. He had a lot to do the upcoming days and needed to talk to Sir Roderick and Winterfell's steward about the supply lines. 9 days later. Arya. It was long past midnight and the castle was sleeping. She quickly and silently unbolted her door. After making sure the coast was clear, she slipped out of her room with Nymeria quick and silently on her heels. "NYM, go to that side and listen if there are any guards coming," she whispered. The direwolf just turned around and silently stalked towards the edge of the corridor. Soon Lyanna came from behind her, as the 2 of them had been sharing a room for months now. They quickly snuck towards their friend's room and after giving a silent knock on the door, it opened. Alera and Wyler were clearly ready and joined them. They had all planned to go on a mission tonight. After Sir Roderick, Lord Harley's and Clee had left Winterfell, one of the barracks lay empty. They had planned to scout out the empty guards' barrack tonight, as her mother had forbidden them from doing so the past few days. They snuck through the family wing. They quickly passed by Alis and Bran's chamber and turned around the corner. She immediately, by instinct, knew they had been caught. However, the eyes that stared her in the face, she had never expected. She looked long and hard in the face of the black-haired young man, before she recognized him. "Theon," she stammered out. Her father's former ward looked at her equally stunned, before regaining his composure. "Arya, is that you? Come quickly here now and I promise you nothing will happen to you," he said. What did that mean? What could ever happen to her here in Winterfell? She thought, just as Nymeria ran up next to her. Her direwolf was growling and baring her teeth and only now she realized that there were over a dozen other men behind Theon. They all looked filthy and were brandishing weapons of all kinds. When she looked better, she saw how more of them were still coming in behind Theon. "Arya, run, quick! Those are Ironborn!" Lyanna yelled, clearly knowing what she was talking about. Nymeria growled loudly and placed herself in front of her, while she and her friends got their daggers out. They had gotten used to carrying them in sheaths wrapped around their right legs all the time. "Get away, Theon! Leave before the guards kill you all!" she snapped. "Arya, for the last time, put down your dagger and stand that monster down." "I don't want to hurt you," Theon said. "We should just kill them all and be done with it. We will lose the surprise." An Ironborn grunted. "Guards, Ironborn are in the castle. Everyone to the Stark family wing. Ironborn are in the castle," she yelled at the top of her lungs. Theon cursed heavily and shouted, "Kill the beast and the other girls, but leave the one that shouted alive." Immediately over a dozen men ran at them. "Guards, help!" she shouted another time, as Nymeria bit out the throat of the first Ironborn. She growled viciously and snapped at another Ironborn, who only just managed to avoid it. The man landed on his ass in the process. Alera quickly took advantage of it, as Nymeria kept most of the other Ironborn at bay. Her friend threw her dagger right into the man's neck and ran forward to grab his axe. Her friend, being an Umber, was far larger and stronger than a girl of 11 should ever be. She swung the axe at another Ironborn, grazing his arm, and a tidal wave of curses erupted from the man's mouth. In the meantime, Nymeria had managed to rip the arm of another off. The blood flew through the room and some spatter landed on her face. She didn't care, as something gripped her. Something, almost wolf-like. She wiped away the blood and with her two remaining friends advanced on the two Ironborn scum that had managed to get past NYM. Her direwolf has sensed this, however, and immediately turned around. Her paw ripping open the last man's upper thigh. His friend, scared and surprised, turned around to face her companion, and on instinct they all pounced on him. Their daggers rose and fell, stabbing at every weakness they could find in the man's leather armor. Suddenly a mighty growl was heard, and she knew Nymeria was hurt before she looked over to her. She saw how a man had slashed at her with a vicious axe. Nymeria's fury was gruesome as she took the man apart limb by limb in a matter of seconds. This distraction, however, led to more and more Ironborn streaming past her direwolf, and she was soon surrounded. She growled and scratched at everyone furiously and kept them at bay, but it didn't look good. She was so concerned with Nymeria that she hadn't seen the Ironborn charging at her. Suddenly she was face to face with a man, and she saw his sword lower towards her own face, only for it to stop halfway. The man screamed in pain, as Lyanna had pushed her dagger very deeply in the man's thigh. The wounded man lashed out and hit her friend hard in the face as she flew back across the corridor. She acted out of instinct, acquired through all her dagger lessons, and ran at the man. She charged and pushed the dagger in his groin with all her might, and the roar that came out of him gave her much satisfaction. She got the dagger out and slashed at the man's throat, blood immediately covering her face. "Arya, run!" Alera shouted. She looked to where the voice was coming from and saw how her friend was being cornered by 3 Ironborn. 5 more walked over to her, Wyler and Lyanna, who had managed to get up again. The latter's nose was bleeding, and one side of her face was turning a little purple, but she nodded that she was fine. Just as she hardened herself for the clash, a growl came from behind her and a grey blur flew past her. It landed on 3 of the Ironborn and started biting and scratching them wildly. She realized it was Lady. Sansa must have let her out of the room to help them. With renewed strength she ran over towards Lady and stabbed one of the Ironborn that had been knocked over in the leg. The man had lost his weapon in his fall, and Wyler quickly kicked him in the face, giving Lyanna the time to stab him in the chest. She looked up and saw more Ironborn come forward, among them Theon. Lady, occupied with holding of the remainder of the 4 Ironborn, couldn't help them. She was doing a good job though, judging by the amount of blood on her hide and muzzle. Soon she heard something behind her and saw how 2 guards made it around the corner. 2 wouldn't be nearly enough, and she wondered where the rest were. She welcomed them though, as they could use any help they could get. She switched her dagger to her left and picked up the sharp blade from the fallen Ironborn and waved it in front of her. She desperately tried to keep back the oncoming enemies, but they were too many. The two guards immediately got in front of them but were soon engaged by Theon and 3 of his followers. She saw how Lyanna managed to wound another Ironborn with a nasty little trick they had learned from Lady Jonelle. However, the next Ironborn's blade cut through the air and hit her shoulder. Then 2 Ironborn came at her. One knocked her blade aside with a powerful stroke and the other stabbed her in her arm. She screamed from the pain as she fell on the ground. She looked helplessly from upon the ground how one of the guards was decapitated by a brutish-looking Ironborn with an axe. Suddenly the growling grew louder. She saw Nymeria break through her encirclement as she growled and scratched around her, whilst charging. The direwolf charged at the 2 men that had attacked her and threw one aside as she bit apart the other one's leg. Not all was fine though, as she saw an arrow was loosely sticking out her companion and she was bleeding from multiple cuts. Nymeria went in a defensive stance above her, shielding her from the oncoming Ironborn. She growled heavily but to her it was clear that Nym was tired and in pain. Wyler ran behind Nymeria, as Theon cut open the last guard's throat. She also saw Alera go down seconds later, taking an Ironborn with her in her fall. She could only look on in shock and hoped her friend would survive. Finally, the sound of footsteps came from behind her and she saw half a dozen guards run into the hallway. The men didn't seem properly armed, as most missed pieces of their armor and no one was wearing a helmet. The half-naked men threw themselves into battle and soon she saw men of both sides go down. By now, Lady had managed to free herself from her attackers and she ran back to them. She pushed both friend and enemy to the ground in her aim to reach Nymeria. Both wolves were tired and panted heavily as they shielded her and Wyler. Although a few Ironborn had gone down, it was clear the guards were going to lose. She saw how Theon hamstrung a guard, before another Ironborn finished him with a slash of his sword. The 2 remaining guards were pushed back, and she shouted to Nymeria to help them. Both she and Lady stalked forward and snapped at the incoming Ironborn, just giving the guards the time to retreat behind them. This wasn't enough however, as one was hit by a throwing axe immediately after. The lack of armor made it a deadly throw. Now Theon regrouped with the remaining dozen of his men. Arya, tell those beasts to stand down or you and all your friends will die like those guards. Theon said in a menacing tone. Fuck off Theon. She managed to grunt out. He and his men had hurt her and her friends. She could see some of the cuts Nymeria had received from underneath her. She would rather die than forgive him that. Theon didn't reply, as the Ironborn just walked forward. The direwolves snarled at them and she saw Nymeria's muscles tense up more and more as the enemies came closer. Suddenly the sound of dozens of footfalls was heard and soon many guards rounded the corner. She saw the fear in Theon's eyes at that. Retreat men, we'll rejoin the others and beat those men with reinforcements. The Ironborn started falling back at that, as she was quickly surrounded by guardsmen. A few of them wanted to follow the Ironborn but another, Donal she immediately knew, shouted for them to get back and secure the royal family. She saw how Nym relaxed and quickly collapsed beside her from wounds and exhaustion. She herself felt light-headed too and suddenly all went dark, as she thought about what had happened to Alera and Lyanna. 3 days later. Alis Stark. She looked out of the window of her room to the men running around and the damaged stables. The fighting had been brutal and the damage huge. The Ironborn had come at night with around 130 men. Some had apparently climbed over the walls and swam the moat. Those Ironborn had killed some of their guard by surprise and opened the gates for the others. She cursed that most of their guards had been new recruits. Most had only been at Winterfell for a few weeks. They probably slacked on their guard duty or didn't watch closely enough. She couldn't ask them, as the bodies of all the watchers on that part of wall had been found. Either their throats were slit or they had been picked off by arrows or throwing axes in the dark. The Ironborn had surprised parts of the garrison. Most of the 300 men, that Sir Roderick had left behind, had been those newly recruited guards and Theon had led his men to some of their barracks. Many of their number had been slaughtered, although fierce resistance had been put up. Luckily a few dozen more experienced men had heard the commotion from a nearby barrack and organized a counterattack. They had rallied a lot of the new guards and a full-out battle had ensued within Winterfell's yard and barracks. It had been tough, as most of their guards hadn't had the time to properly arm themselves. There had been many instances where their men just charged into battle wearing nothing more than a sword and undergarments. All the while Theon and some 25 men had stalked into the castle, intent on capturing her and the rest of the Stark family. So, they had learned from an Ironborn captive. It had been unruly Arya, of all people, that had stopped him in his tracks with the help of her friends, Nymeria and later on Lady. Without them they would have probably been captured and the castle taken. Still, the price had been heavy. Arya had been wounded and was bedridden. Her friend Lyanna had it even worse. Her shoulder had been severely cut by an Ironborn blade. Maester Lewin said she would heal but it could take months. Nymeria had faced many cuts and was bedridden too, next to Arya. Maester Lewin had said that it had been a miracle the direwolf had kept standing so long with all the wounds she received. Those beasts truly were powerful. She didn't doubt for a second that the old gods had sent them to protect her husband's family. Without them they would all be Ironborn captives now. She made a mental note to again thank the gods for their existence when she would go to pray tomorrow. The worst loss had been Alara Umber. The girl had fought like a lion, or a giant, if you were to believe Wyler's testimony. She had been found on the ground by the guards as they secured the family wing. She had been dead already, stabbed multiple times and hit by an axe after or so she was told. She had had to write letters to Last Hearth and South to tell her family. Who knows how the Umbers would react to this news, or more accurately where they would turn their rage to. She just hoped it wasn't them. The rage of an Umber was nothing to laugh about. Wyler Mandaeli had been inconsolable. She had been cursing non-stop and had apparently already written 3 letters to her father to send a force to destroy every Ironborn on the continent. It was understandable, she had just lost her best friend who she had seen as a little sister. Her 2 other friends were also badly wounded and she seemed guilty about being the only one that was unhurt. Jonelle had taken her in, as the girl refused to sleep alone. Lady Catelyn had been beside Arya for most of the time since the attack. This left her to take care of the castle. They had lost 187 men, with another 45 heavily wounded. The Ironborn's body count stood at 103, with 12 more captives. After her family had been secured, the remainder of the guards and servants had been rallied by some more guards and had joined the fight. This had turned the tide and they had slowly been able to push out the Ironborn. In their retreat, the Ironborn had burned 2 of the guard barracks, as well as the smithy and part of the stables. She sat down at her desk and looked at her notes once more. The remainder of the men had already buried their dead. They had stabilized the remainder of the stables and were now hard at work on the smithy. The barracks could wait, as they weren't all in use anyway. Later on, they could rebuild them and the part of the stables that had been destroyed. She had wanted to send out men to capture the Ironborn leader, Theon Greyjoy, but they just didn't have the forces. If you counted all the men who had only suffered light injuries, she had only 68 of the 300 men left that had been at Winterfell. This was barely enough to garrison the castle and she would only feel safe when Sir Roderick returned. House Sewin had promised to send a few dozen men and they were expected to arrive by nightfall. Still this wasn't enough to replace all the men they had lost. However, she did make a mental note of the house's loyalty. First, Jonelle had helped Rob's sisters before marrying into House Castle. Secondly, Lord Meager had joined Rob in his march south and had bravely fought under her father at the Green Fork. His important task had led him to be captured by the Lannisters and he had died in captivity there. Thirdly, the new Lord Clee had jumped at their command to join Sir Roderick in freeing Torrens Square and now they would send additional men. She would have to remind Rob to reward them after the war. No one deserved it more than them. She had written to Rob and had made it clear that everyone else in the family, including the baby in her belly, was fine and that Arya would recover nicely. Knowing him, he would almost certainly want to march north immediately to protect them. He couldn't though. He had to win against the south for them to ever be safe again. Last she had heard, he had still been staying at the crag. He had been wounded by an arrow but had written to her that everything was fine. Harry and To had backed this up, so she decided he would recover and she didn't have to worry. Jon would continue his campaign while he rested and recovered. She was glad for it. She didn't know Jon well, but Rob had always talked highly about him throughout the years. She knew that Rob didn't see him as a bastard, but as his brother. She had long foregone every distrust aimed towards him. Everything she heard from Rob, first at Carhold and then later when they had been together or through letters sent from campaign, showed he was loyal and capable. He could be a great asset for her husband's rule, and she was glad he had him despite all what Lady Caitlin said. Besides, she had had her brothers and father check him. All they told her seemed to confirm her suspicion. He was honorable and loyal to the bone towards first his father and now his brother. John leading in Rob's absence would be best. He could make sure the campaign didn't lose momentum. She hoped Rob and her brothers would be done soon in the Westerlands. Every day, since she had heard the news about Ed, she had feared for his life. She stood up from her desk and made herself ready to leave. She was going to visit the widows and mothers of the men that had died in the attack. It was the least she could for them, after they gave their lives for her and her new family. When enough guards had returned and the area was safe again, she would also tour the surrounding towns and villages as many had come from there as well. Until then, her showing at Wintertown would have to do. She picked up her coat to leave her room when a knock was heard on the door. "Who is it?" she asked. "It is Maester Lewin, your grace. A raven from Torrens Square has just arrived," the voice behind the door said. "Enter, Maester," she replied. The man came in and handed her the letter, after performing a respectful bow. She put her coat on her chair, sat down and started to read. To Queen Alice and Lady Caitlin. The siege of Torrens Square is broken. We won a battle against the Ironborn under its walls. We killed 2/3 of their 400 men, the remainder fled back to the Stony Shore. Our losses were minimal. We will depart back to Winterfell in the morning. I have already sent scouts west and north to the Stony Shore and into the Wolfwood to track the remaining Ironborn. We should be back in less than a fortnight. Sir Roderick Castle. This was good news. There was no way that Sir Roderick could have already received the news of what had happened here. The fact he was still coming back to Winterfell proved he was a capable and patient commander. Many young hotheads like Sir Benfred would have chased the Ironborn all across the shore, leaving their defences weakened. In less than a fortnight Winterfell would be secure again. They would even have a reasonable-sized force to send out. Even if they keep all their Stark men in Winterfell, the Hornwoods and Sewins still command hundreds. The Marndalis, Locks, Dustins, Tall Hearts and Flints had also been levying more men for Rob. They could be put to good use as well. She would have to discuss this with the commanders once they returned. She thanked the Maester and picked up her coat again. Now, she really needed to leave for Wintertown. It was becoming more difficult to go to the town with her ever-expanding belly. If she waited too long, she would postpone it. That wouldn't do. She just hoped that the baby wouldn't kick too much, but she doubted she would get her wish. This would be a long afternoon. Chapter 29, Tywin starts to make moves. 299 AC. John. He walked to his room next to his brother's after another exhausting day. He had been making rounds in the army. On a normal day he had to secure the communication lines and the supplies for not only their main force, but some of the raiding bands as well. Today he had wanted to get the troops' morale measured and improved, if possible. The state of affairs was clear. The soldiers were getting bored and fat and the commanders restless. In response, Rob had already created new bands to raid the Westerlands. Dom had already left with the Dustin and Bolton riders a few days ago. Although this alleviated some of the pressure, it was not enough. They would need to ride out soon. The men wanted another victory. He planned to remind his brother of that in the morning. He knew how hard it was for him, as he was still mostly bedridden. He wanted to lead his men but was in no way able to do so. Still, they would need to march. His brother would need to appoint another as commander. The Great Yon was situated around Ashmark and would do nicely. Galbart Glover was also on his way back from raiding and would make for a good commander. Rob would need to choose, but he would need to choose quickly. The men were becoming restless and he didn't like the Westerland family here one bit. The children seemed fine, even the heir that had fought against them. The eldest daughter Jane seemed to behave weird around Rob, but she was a sweet girl in all. No, it was their mother and her crafty brother the Spicers that concerned him. They had taken this castle weeks ago, but in some way it still seemed like they ruled it. At first, he had done his best to both accommodate them and curb their meddling. His efforts hadn't been successful, as they just seemed to ignore him for his birth. After a while, he had just let them be. Although he still watched them, as he knew something wasn't right. Ghost told him that, as his companion was always restless when they were near. He walked through his brother's room and reported on the army before excusing himself and going to bed. "This early?" Rob asked. "Yes, I'm exhausted," he replied, and his brother just nodded. He entered his room and changed into nothing more than his breeches before laying on his bed. Ghost quickly made himself comfortable on the rugged carpet. He had grown way too big to fit on the end of the bed, although he still liked to try from time to time. He petted the wolf and thought silently about his siblings in Winterfell, before falling in a dreamless sleep. He woke up a few hours later to the sound of people talking next door. It was clear that his brother had company. After a while he recognized the voice as Lady Jane's. He looked out of the small service window in the room and frowned. Wasn't it too late for a visit, even to check his wounds? He sat up on his bed and listened in on the conversation. It became soon clear that the girl was flirting with his brother. A thing which seemed strange, as she seemed way too shy for that. The more he listened, the more he realized his brother's awkwardness even from behind the door. He decided to jump in and picked up a tunic. He quickly threw it over his head and tucked it in his breeches. He opened the door and walked into his brother's room. The confusion on the girl's face was adamant, Rob's relief too. He saw how she was sitting much too close to his brother, on the side of the bed. Still something didn't feel right to him. The girl didn't look at ease either. As if she didn't do to that either, or at least that she was far too shy to be that forward. He greeted his brother with a weak "I couldn't sleep," as he kept looking at Jane. He was just about to let the feeling of unease go, when Ghost walked towards the girl and slightly turned his head. His direwolf felt uneasy too. He felt that something wasn't right, but it looked like Ghost didn't know if it was Jane's either. Then it started dawning on him, if it wasn't her fault and she had no malicious intent, whose was it? Who had anything to gain if Rob were to answer Jane's obvious advances? Her family could, as her being the mistress of the king could give them many benefits. Still, it would create such chaos. When Harry returned and found that another girl than Alice was in Rob's bed, he would rage, and everybody knew this. If anything were to happen here, it could damage the alliance between Houses Stark and Karstark. That alliance itself was the glue that kept the North together. Everybody knew his foolish brother would be too much like father to put the girl aside. However, who would use this to their advantage? He looked around and had to remember himself that they were still in enemy territory. The Westerlings and Spicers were their enemies. It was likely they wanted revenge for the loss of their troops at Riverrun and the loss of their castle. Breaking up an enemy's cause by using a young girl's feelings seemed harsh, but not unreasonable for a land that brought forth Tywin Lannister. He looked upon the girl once more, and when he saw a glimmer of fear go through her eyes, he decided. He walked towards her menacingly and asked deeply. "Who set you up to this? Who wants you to seduce my brother?" The shock on her face was only surpassed by Rob's. "Jon, what are you doing? Leave the poor girl alone," he said, perplexed from atop his bed. "No, Rob. I think there is more at stake here than you dashing Tully looks," he said as he turned to his brother. He turned back and repeating the questing to Jane. I don't know what you're talking about, sir," she almost whispered. "I am no sir, and I don't believe you." "Who put you up to this?" he asked, rougher this time. No one," she stuttered, but the way she looked at her feet betrayed her. Ghost had seen it too and bared his teeth slightly as he walked up to her. "Stop this madness, Jon. You're scaring the poor girl. She is young and naive, that's all," Rob shouted, but he paid it no mind. He stepped forward and put a hand beneath the girl's chin, as he lifted it up slowly. "Who put you up to this?" he asked once more. This time he made sure to lace his voice with a lot more menace. The girl was shaking in his hand as she tried to look away. "Stop this now, Jon. I command it," his brother screamed. He heard the door unlock and saw Owen Nuri run in with his axe in hand. The man stopped when he saw the scene in front of him. After he made sure that Rob was safe, he looked confused between them as his brother shouted at him to stop Jane from getting hurt. He walked slowly towards him. Let the girl be, John. I don't want to hurt you for the sake of some stupid southern girl. Owen said carefully. He just put his hand up towards him to make him halt and turned back to the girl. He demanded of Jane, answer me, now. Before anyone gets hurt. The girl started to cry. It was my mother, she said in between sobs. What? Rob exclaimed, stopping Owen from moving any closer towards him. What did you say? His brother said, more loudly and commanding now. Jane looked up at Rob, frightened at the sight of him she had rarely seen. Answer him, he said to the girl, he will not hurt you when you tell him the truth. Nor will I, but you have to answer him. The girl sobbed and nodded. My mother noticed that I liked his grace and started talking about it with Uncle Rolf. After a while she came to me and asked me outright if I liked his grace. When I said yes, she encouraged me to make a move on you. She said that it would be good for our house. I didn't care for any of that. I just like being with you and was glad that my mother approved. The girl explained, totally red from embarrassment after having to admit her feelings for Rob. His brother looked perplexed. His gaze went from the girl to him and back to the girl. Encouraging a daughter to befriend a king is no crime, John. He managed to get out at last. No, it isn't. However, these families are still our enemies, Rob. Jane here is clearly innocent of any crime, but I wouldn't count her mother and uncle out that quick, he said seriously. What would they possibly have to gain against me with this, he said as he waved his non-wounded arm in the air. Revenge, for taking down their lord, men and castle for starters, he responded dryly. Rob scoffed and pointed at Jane, who had cowered away in a corner. Really, you think they'd go that far? Yes, this far and even further if it would help bring you down, he responded without an ounce of doubt. I don't believe it's no, his brother tried to wave it off. If I may, your grace. Owen Neri said. The man had bound his axe back on his back and was watching the exchange between them. Of course, Owen. Say what you want. Rob said. Well, your brother speaks true, your grace. These Southrons are not like us. They plot and scheme and half of them only regard us as savages. The pretty maid's mother is one of those. She hasn't looked at or talked to any of us since we captured the castle. She only talks to that brother of hers, and he is a sly one. Talks with a silver tongue, but his eyes look on everyone with contempt. If I were you, I'd check it out, your grace. If you wish it so, I will do it for you, the clansman said, brutally honest as always. This had his brother taken aback, as he clearly didn't suspect this. You really think they would do this? Rob asked. No, I think they could, and that's more than enough for me to check it out, he replied honestly. At this, his brother nodded. Fine, I give you leave to check out anything on Lady Westerling and Sir Spicer. Check any of the household if need be, but leave Jane and her siblings alone. I also don't want anyone to get hurt, do you understand me? Loud and clear, Stark. I will get on with it immediately, he responded as he marched back into his room to get dressed. He picked out some better garments and wore his basic armor. It wouldn't hurt to look a little more threatening. He adjusted his sword to his belt and left. He went straight to the nearest barracks that housed Stark troops and woke some 20 guards. He promised them all a silver stag out of the coffers of the Westerlings if they did their orders quickly and without complaint. All joined him eagerly. Some men were sent to Sir Rolf Spicer and Lady Westerly to get them into custody. Furthermore, these men had to search their rooms and look for all of their correspondence. Maybe they were talking to other houses in the Westerlands. Better to cross of every possible treachery at once. Some men were sent to guard the Westerling children's rooms. He would never touch them, but Lady Westerling didn't know this. It was never wrong to put some more pressure on his target, Lord Wyman had taught him this. Other guards were sent to get the head servants. They would be interrogated, as it was likely that they knew more if something was up. He himself and the last 4 guards walked to the Maester's quarters. Even if all of this was for naught, he didn't care. He would do anything to protect his brother from danger, perceived or real. Besides, he didn't like these people anyway. They treated him like dirt, just because of his birth. Maybe this would teach them. 3 times he knocked on the Maester's door. It had been hard and decisive, or so he hoped. After a while, the maester opened the door. He was clearly still sleep-drunk and looked at him with contempt. He pushed past the maester and the guards followed him. Look through everything. Anything that is correspondence you take with you. He might have hidden it, so you look behind, under and above everything. His men nodded at him and got to work. What is the meaning of this? You can't be in here and definitely not at this hour. The maester screamed out. He ignored the red-faced man and walked over to the man's desk. He looked over the papers on the desk and saw they were well organized. Good, that might make this a lot easier. He picked up the letter that was laying in the middle of the desk to start reading it. Put that down. You can't be in here. Put that down. The maester screamed, as he tried to push him away from the desk. He pushed back the maester and called out for one of the guards. Bernard, escort the maester out. I fear he will interrupt with our work. Of course, Lord Snow, the man said, as he grabbed the maester under the arm and dragged him out. You can't do this, bastard. Wait until my lady hears about this. You will rue the day your father impregnated your whore of a mother, the maester screamed, but it quickly stopped once Bernard punched him in the face. He should give that man a raise from out of his own coffers, he thought amusingly. He looked down and saw that the letter that he had wanted to read had fallen on the ground. He picked it up and started reading. He immediately understood why the maester had lost it like that. The first letters read to Lord Tywin Lannister. The next day. Rob. He couldn't believe his eyes when his brother had returned yesterday evening, less than 2 hours after he had allowed him his search. He had acted swiftly, that was sure. Lady Westerling and her brother were already in custody and the Westerling children detained in their chambers. Jon told him that nothing had been found in their chambers. They had probably burned any evidence against them. Their maester wasn't so intelligent, it seemed. A letter had been found, clearly written by the maester's own hand. It was addressed to Tywin Lannister, but more important was that it was signed by Sir Rolf Spicer. It was meant to be sent first thing in the morning. The letter clearly showed both Lady Westerling and Sir Spicer's involvement in a plot. They wanted him to put aside, or at least betray, his wife for Jane. The letter made it clear that Lord Tywin was behind this and Jon had immediately gone to the dungeons, even before seeing him. He had interrogated both culprits. Sir Rolf hadn't said a word, but Lady Westerling had admitted everything after Jon had threatened to feed all her children to Ghost. He knew his brother well enough to know he would never have done such a thing, but bluffing seemed to work out for him. The story that Lady Westerling told was even more shocking. Tywin wanted to break the North's resolve from within. By breaking up his marriage he wanted to break the Northern unity and rob him of the possibility to have an heir. Lady Westerling told Jon that after Jane would be allowed in his bed, they would give her herbs so no child would come of it. The girl didn't know any of it and he was disgusted by it. Who would do something like this to her own child and why? Well, the last question could easily be answered. The old lion had apparently promised Castamaria to Sir Rolf and House Spicer. Besides that, he promised good and honorable marriages for the Westerling sons, even hinting at Lannister cousins. The woman had given up her eldest daughter in favor of her sons and brother. When he heard the news first, he went to check it and spoke to both of them. When confronted with his sister's confession, Sir Rolf only scoffed. He called them nothing more than bastards and savages. It didn't matter, his guilt was clear to see. Afterwards he called for Jane and told her everything. The girl was clearly in shock. He allowed her to join her siblings in a joined room. That way they could be there for each other. All of them would be unharmed and travel to Seaguard, to join in comfortable captivity with their father. However, he made it clear that both her mother and uncle would be punished severely. The time for that punishment had come now. He was helped into the courtyard by the small Jon, although at times it seemed more as if his giant friend was carrying him. Arriving there he was immediately seated in the middle of the yard. Before him in the dirt sat the maester and brother and sister on their knees. Around them, the entire servant staff had gathered, together with many northern nobles and soldiers. "We will make this swift, as evidence against you is clear," he said with as clear and commanding a voice as he could muster. "You have been proven to spy and plot on the orders of Tywin Lannister. All of this, after oaths have been sworn when you surrendered the castle. You plotted to break up my marriage to destabilize the North. You also told Lord Tywine of our numbers and strengths and possible internal division. The punishment for these offenses is clear. He called out their crimes. First is the Maester. You are sworn to serve the Master of the Crag. After my men and I took the castle, you were sworn to serve me. Instead you betrayed me and continued to serve your old masters to bring me harm. This cannot be tolerated, he said decisively against the man. I couldn't serve you, your grace. You were wounded and barely ever let me have an audience with you. You preferred that Lady Jane took care of you, the man said, trying everything to get out from getting punishment. He scoffed at that. The reason he had preferred Jane was because Grey and Ghost hadn't liked the Maester from day one. It seemed they had been right. I clearly instructed you to direct everything to my brother. It was you who didn't listen and betray me. For this you will be stripped of your position at the Crag and be sent to the wall. The Night's Watch has an urgent need of Maesters and you will do fine, he responded with contempt at the weak man in front of him. That bastard. You want to send me to that dreadful place to watch Snooks and Grumpkins after you insulted me with sending me to that base-born savage. You can't be serious, the man shouted out. This made him angry. Nobody talked about his brother that way. He heard Grey Wind growl loudly as the direwolf moved slowly towards the man. He tried to calm himself and simply responded, oh but I can, and I am serious. The letter to the Citadel has already left this morning. Besides, if I hadn't decided on this already, you would be sent to the wall because of your words now. No one speaks about my brother in that manner. He waved at one of the guards. Take him away and find him the most uncomfortable cell you can find. He will stay there until we move him to Riverrun with us. The large guard nodded and dragged the Maester out. Now he looked at the knight in front of him. His knees up through the mud, but defiant as ever. It was clear why you did it, sir. You would have gotten Castemaria as your seat. Well, was it worth it? He simply stated. I would do it all again with pleasure, your grace. Sir Rolf responded, clearly mocking his title. That's that then. The only regret I have is that your house won't end with you here, as you still have one living cousin in Lord Tywine's force. If we're lucky, the man will die on the battlefield when the old lion finally stops hiding in Harrenhal. He has been behaving like a scared little cat instead of a lion for far too long, and the South can do with a few less treacherous houses, he said, and all his men started laughing. Ha, you think the lion is scared of you? Soon Winterfell will be nothing more than a rubble. All that will be left will be a song to remember Lord Tywine's wrath. Maybe they could call it House Spicer's Vengeance, the knight scoffed. Now his men all started shouting and screaming at Sir Rolf. The man was even hit with one or two things, as the first voices were already calling for his head. He held up his hands and simply responded. You seem to have forgotten that your precious cat has lost about every battle in this war. Besides, it doesn't matter, as you and your house will not be there to see it. Sir Rolf, for your crimes against House Stark and breaking your oath, I sentence you to death. Immediately 2 guards pulled up the knight and put his head on a block of wood. His man started to cheer as they thirsted for blood. They had been cooped up here for too long. As is custom, the one who passes the sentence must swing the sword. However, as I am incapable due to my wound, my brother will do it in the name of House Stark. He continued, as he looked over to Jon. His brother simply nodded. He walked over to the block and got out his sword. No, Jon, he simply said. His brother looked at him in confusion, not knowing what he meant. Do it with this, he gestured as his squire Oliver Free brought out ice. Jon looked at him with shock and fascination in his eyes. He looked at the sword for a while, before nodding and taking it from Oliver. He took the sword out of its scabbard and lined it up in front of his face, admiring the Valyrian steel. His brother looked at him with a face full of emotions, but without saying a word. He turned to Sir Rolf Spicer and demanded loudly, do you have any last words? Piss off, you savages. The Westerlands will have their revenge, the man spat out, as he put his head down. Mere seconds later, ice cleaved through the air and the head came clean off. It hobbled in the dirt towards his feet and he signaled a guard to take it away. Lady Sybil Westerling, you stand guilty of the same accusations. For this, you will be sent to the Silent Sisters. You will be allowed to say goodbye to your children one more time. For their sake, not yours. On the morrow you will be transported to their nearest convent. This will be all, he declared loudly. The guards dragged the sobbing Lady Westerling away and the small John came to help him back inside. John walked up towards him. I think I need to go pray, he mumbled. Just like father, when he took a life. Go, you know where the Westerling's old weirwood tree is, he responded, and his brother nodded solemnly. John took ice with him, probably intent on cleaning it like their father had done numerous times in Winterfell. He didn't mind, he would ask it back after. He was really grateful that the Westerlings were of First Men descent. It wouldn't have been right for John without a weirwood to pray to. Come small John, we need to get back inside. His friend only grinned at this, as he grabbed him up in his arms. 2 days later. Rob. He sat in his room, with his most trusted nobles around him as he opened the letter again. His father-in-law had sent word at last and they needed to know. He read the letter out loud. King Rob. In your absence I have led an attack on a sellsword company arriving in Maidenpool. With my own Karstark men, aided by some Freys and a company under Harmond Umber, we have destroyed the small Isozi force. We managed to completely surprise them. We killed almost all of them, numbering around 900 men. Our losses numbered just over 100. We burned down their few ships and brought everything of value with us to the Twins. More and more sellsword have come from the east unchallenged and this had to change. However, Lord Mutan never left his keep to assist us. When we proposed to bring him back with us, he refused. We dismantled the harbour at Maidenpool to make sure no new sellswords will arrive this way. In response to our attack, Tywin has sent a force to destroy Maidenpool. The Lord and its castle are no more. Although his house remains, as one of his sons is staying in Riverrun. After this, Lord Tywin has started marching west. Your uncle, Sir Ed Muir, has ordered me and all our men to go south and take Harrenhal. Against orders, I have left 2,000 men under Robert Glover at the Twins. I don't trust the Freys and they could be useful in ridding Moat Cailin of the Ironborn. Sir Hellman will join the march. He asked for action after the news of his son's death and I granted it to him. Your uncle plans to stop the Lannisters from going west. He has called the Rivermen to arms. By the time this reaches you, it will be too late to change this, but you ought to know. Your father-in-law, Rickard Karstark, Lord of Carhold. Tywin's finally coming west, then the small John said with a smile. Yes, but there is nothing to laugh at. Either they never get west or we unnecessarily lose a lot of Rivermen for it, he answered, his annoyance clear in his voice. Why can't that boy never just do as he's told? Sir Brynden sighed exasperated. He had one task, to hold Riverrun and stay put. He isn't supposed to stop the whole Lannister army. Indeed, uncle. This messes up our whole plan. Do you think he'll be able to hold of Tywin? He asked his most experienced commander. That's difficult to say really, but it is very possible. I hope Hoster and I at least learned the boy something. If I were him, I would hold them at the fords over here. The Blackfish said as he pointed on the Riverlander map. He could hold a defensive position and do some damage. The problem with it is that he could never deal out a decisive defeat. So, even if Ed Muir is smart and he wins, Tywin will still be out there. He cursed silently under his breath. His other uncle would simply make his trap useless. The Great Jon had already found a field of battle close to Ashmark where they could have ambushed the whole Lannister force if needed. Otherwise they could have just led them on a chase while Lord Stannis captured King's Landing. What do we do then? What are we doing here, if it's likely that Tywin won't be able to come west? Daisy asked. We could spread out more and loot more of this gold-infested country. I would fancy myself some more gold. Last Hearth could do with a bigger glass garden coming winter. Small John replied with another grin on his face. We still don't know that. John simply responded. The Lannisters could still break through Sir Ed Muir's defences and be on us in weeks. The Golden Tooth still stands defiant and it could provide them with a place to rest and resupply their army before marching on us. It would also provide them with more men and information than he has right now. John's right. Sir Wendell joined in. The man looked pensively over the others as he continued. We can't act on the premise of something we don't yet. It would be safest if we laid out two plans. One for if Lord Tywine were to get through and another for if he doesn't. That way we won't be surprised. He looked over his group of friends and close advisors and saw almost all of them nod in agreement. That's a good idea, Sir Wendell. He joined in. I propose we keep the plan for if the Lannisters were to break through. It is solid and everyone agreed to it before he looked questioningly at the room, but no one objected. That just leaves us with what to do if he doesn't come west. He summarized their situation. We could either go back to the Riverlands or remain here. Why go back to the Riverlands? To do what? Sit on our asses and wait for the lions to make a move. Here we have the initiative, why give that up? Owen stated fiercely. Most of his northerners seemed to agree with this. To his surprise Sir Brynden also nodded. Masternary's right. The only problem is that we don't know where Tywine would go to. If he marches back on Harrenhal, the foot under Lord Rickard might be in trouble. His veteran uncle responded, already thinking 2 steps ahead. Good point. I will write a letter to Lord Rickard to state that he is to retreat back to the Twins if that happens. If everyone wants to stay here, where do we go? He continued. His uncle looked at the map of the Westerlands on the other table. As I see it, we have 3 courses of action. The first, and the simplest, is to keep doing what we are doing now. Raid the countryside, take castles and towns of Westerland vassals. We break the aura of Lannister invincibility in the west as we enrich ourselves. Try to turn his lords against him by taking their homes. If we follow this path, the Bane Fort in the north, Case and Feast Fires further west and Sussfield in the center are our prime targets. This would alienate Houses Bane Fort, Kenning, Prester and Sussfield and give us control of a third of the Westerlands in total. It would also completely cut off the Golden Tooth, which has its benefits. He nodded at this, as this plan had already crossed his mind. The second possibility is to take the Golden Tooth. The castle is a mighty fortress and would be a great blow to Westerlander morale. It is a rich castle with its own mines, it would be worth it only for that, but more important is that it is also the gate to the west. If we garrison it, it would give us the possibility to freely move reinforcements back and forth and get our spoils of war into the Riverlands more easily. It would also mean that if we had to go back to Riverrun we could easily come back to resume our campaign if we wanted to. His uncle continued. The third and most ambitious possibility is to go for Lannisport. Casterly Rock is sadly unassailable, especially with our numbers now. However, Lannisport is not. It would shatter Lannister invincibility to sack the economic center of the West under their own noses. This plan comes with its difficulties. First of all, there are still a few enemy castles between us and Lannisport, Sussfield first among them. It would take weeks to take all of these, and if we don't, we risk getting cut off from our supply lines. The second problem is the small Lannister army amassing in Lannisport. We expect there to be some 2,000 men now, but it could grow quickly. If they are smart, they stay inside the city and man the walls with the city watch. It could be hell to get through that. Because of their connection to the sea, we could never siege them out and we would have to assault. It could be a bloodbath. His uncle finished up. All nobles looked at the map in thought. After a few moments of silence, Jon spoke up. It seems to me that the key to all 3 plans is Sussfield. It could help lower morale of the Westerlands and give us the spoils we want. It could help isolate the Golden Tooth and it could pave the way for our march on Lannisport. Why don't we attack there first and decide later? Everybody looked at the map with new interest, tracking Jon's words. That could work. Sir Brynden said. Aye, but we would leave ourselves open to possible reprisals by Houses Kenning, Prester and Bane Fort. If they try to disrupt our communications or supplies, we could be hard-pressed. The Smallgen countered. The Bane Forts are no threat. If we garrison the crag here, they couldn't get south without taking it back. The Kennings and Presters can be countered and slowed by our raiding parties. They would need their men to stabilize the region after our men left, and they would lose soldiers, wealth and materials in the attacks themselves. Jon said, more and more confident. Aye, but what poor bastards would we leave here in the crag? The Smallgen responded, clearly not wanting the job. Jon looked at him with a smile and he smiled back. The phrase of course, who else, his brother said with a huge grin. Now all around the table chuckled and nodded. Good, are we all in agreement? We will await the result of the battle in the Riverlands and act accordingly. In the meantime, more raiding parties will be sent west to harass the Kennings and Prestus. I plan to send the Riswells there in the coming days. Maybe a free detachment or Lord Deddings as well. I will make sure they will be back in time if House Lannister breaks through. He finalized the discussions. All nodded. Then there is only one more thing I would like to discuss. Tywin's plot needs to be answered. Some of you have made it clear the past few days that if I don't respond to this, the plots will keep coming. I cannot allow this to happen. How long will it be before he tries to target my family? We agree, but how will you strike back? Daisy asked. I intend to finally use our Lannister hostages to send him a message. I will make him see what happens when he plays by his own rules. We will start with Sir Jaime and I hope he gets the message, as I have no intention of killing children. He responded, as he thought about the blonde-haired boys in the dungeons of Riverrun and Ashmark. They even had his sister's sons as well, if need be. Officially they were Freys, yes, but in truth they were Lannisters in all but name. You would send the fucker the Kingslayer's head? The small Jon asked, an eyebrow raised. The Umber heir was clearly not against the idea, but it seemed like he was skeptical about him following through on it. No, not his head. His sword hand will do. To make sure he never lifts up arms against the North again. I don't want you or your families to experience what Darin, Ed or Os had to experience. He said grimly, and he could feel the room harden. Many here had been friends with either one of the boys in question or their fathers. You sure, Robb? If you do this, Tywin's wrath will be immense. The Blackfish asked. Yes, I am. They unjustly killed my father, uncle. The man in question killed my brother-in-law. Still now, they are plotting my demise in the shadows. This needs to be answered. Otherwise, how long will it take before I find daggers in my or my family's rooms at night? He said with hardened resolve. His uncle looked him in the eye for a long while, before agreeing. It is time that Goldprick is put down from his self-acclaimed pedestal anyway. He looked around, but all seemed in silent agreement. Most had wanted him to take his head before, so it was not that surprising. I still think his head would be a better message, and I think Harry and Os would agree, but I think his sword hand is a nice start. To finally joined in. He looked at his brother-in-law and nodded. I will send the Raven on the morrow. Now that is all for today. All men trickled out except Jon. There is someone who wants to meet you. A captain under Dom's command. One of the commanders appointed in the Dustin Company. Yes, Dom said something about that. Why didn't he join the raiding force? He responded. He was injured on the shoulder in the taking of the castle. He is still recovering. His brother explained, as he motioned his hand through his newly grown beard. He nodded in response, knowing exactly what that was like. Help me in a chair here and let him in, he said. Dom had wanted this to happen for days. There should be something he needed to hear. Do you want me to stay? Jon asked. No, that's fine. Grey Wind is with me and Flint is at the door. I'll be fine, he responded. Jon merely nodded. After he was seated on the chair and had received some extra cushions to make his position easier, Jon let the captain in. After sharing a look with him, he left and closed the door. The man that entered seemed to be in his late 30s. He had a mop of light brown hair that was clearly combed for the occasion. He wore a nice yellow tunic and black pants, the Dustin colors. On the front was emblazoned a coat of arms. The arms were quartered. The top left and bottom right showed the axes and crown of the Dustins. The bottom left showed the grey stone hand of the Flints. The top right showed a running black wolf. As the man entered, he immediately went to one knee and said, "Thank you for accepting my audience, Your Grace." "Greetings, Captain. Please, stand up. It is always with pleasure that I meet a loyal Northman, especially someone who has fought and bled for our cause. Although you do have me at a disadvantage, as I do not know your name." He responded, still a little awkward about the devotion his men showed him. I am Roderick Dustin, your grace. The captain responded. This piqued his interest. Dustin. As in Dustin from Barrow Hall? He asked curiously. Yes and no, your grace. Yes, I am a descendant of that family, although I myself am from a lesser branch. Roderick responded. How much lesser? He asked. The Dustin family running through his mind. He knew Lady Dustin was only a Dustin by marriage. To his knowledge, the late Lord William hadn't had any brothers, uncles or cousins to speak of. This was why his father had allowed her to keep in power. This and to placate her and her father Lord Riswell. He had heard there were still some distant cousins in Barrowtown, although he never heard anything specific. I am a fourth cousin from the late Lord William, your grace. The man simply replied. Are you the eldest remaining Dustin relative, Master Dustin? He asked, trying to figure out why Dom would want him to speak to this man. It didn't make any sense. To all accounts, this man was a pretender to his aunt's titles. No, your grace. There is another family. They are also fourth cousins, but from a more senior line. The captain responded, as dutiful as before. Now he was even more confused. He would need to get to the bottom of this. Please sit, good man. He said, as he waved to the chair in front of him. Thank you, your grace. The man said, as he did so. Now, I must say I don't know the family tree of House Dustin intricately enough to understand all this. Would you care to explain? How many Dustin cousins are there? He asked, giving the man a small smile. Hopefully that would help him to relax a little. It would do him good to learn more of this situation, as the Dustin succession would probably have to be dealt with during his reign. There are around 5 more families with male line Dustin descent, your grace. My family and the family I spoke about are closest. The others are further away, one even going to a 9th cousin or something. The man replied. Didn't any of you make a claim when Lord William died? He asked surprised. One of us did, the former head of the aforementioned family. He tried to rally the warriors of the Barrowlands against Lady Barbary, but most didn't want to fight after coming back from the rebellion. The help Lady Barbary got, militarily and financially, by Lord Riswell did the rest. Roderick explained, and he wasn't that surprised. Former head, you said? Yes, the man died 2 years later from an illness. Bad tongues say Lady Barbary poisoned him, but I don't believe that to be true. He had been a 3rd cousin and confidant of Lord William's father, although the late Lord William didn't like him and had dismissed him after his father died. His claim was taken up by his 2 young sons. They are now in their early 20s and travelled with the foot. Although I heard the youngest one died in the Battle of the Green Fork. The Dustin cousin explained. He mused over this information. After a while he continued his questioning. Do any of these brothers have children? No, your grace. Both are married to women of the local nobility, but none have any children. The answer came. So, if let's say Lady Barbary was to die tomorrow and I would follow the Dustin inheritance, that would make you the heir to Barrow Hall? He asked, eyeing the man for any reaction on this comment. If the man was greedy and wanted the titles, he would know. He heard Grey Wind shift forward as well, as if he knew he had to watch for dishonesty. The man seemed perplexed by his question. Well, I mean, I suppose so, your grace. I never really thought about it. We have always been so far away from the succession that it didn't really matter. The man's surprise seemed honest. He decided there that he liked the man, after he looked at Grey for confirmation. The direwolf nodded, and as such he had no reason to doubt him. It still didn't make sense why Dom sent him here. Did he want him to make this man his aunt's heir over the other one? Why? Lady Barbary might try to push one of her brothers or even Domeric himself as heir, although he could never accept that. Still, it made for a weird situation. He looked at the man in thought, until Roderick finally spoke. If I may, your grace. Yes, of course, speak. He said, hoping the Dustin would clarify things for him. Lord Domeric didn't ask me to speak with you on account of my father's family. He didn't. He interrupted the man. No, your grace. He wanted me to speak of my mother's family. The captain replied. Your mother's family. Who is your mother? He asked. The man was so far down the line he doubted his mother could have been very highborn. Maybe some cousin of another noble house in the north. Why would this concern him? My mother's name was Lysara Dustin, your grace. However, before she married my father, she was called Lysara Stark. She was named after her grandmother. The man replied. Lysara Stark. He had seen that name before. Somewhere in the Stark family tree. He tried to think where he had seen it, but it didn't come as quickly as he had hoped. The man helped him, before he embarrassed himself, for which he was glad. My mother Lysara Stark was called after her grandmother, Lysara Stark formerly Karstark. She was the wife of Artos Stark and mother of her two sons Brandon and Benjen Stark. Now he knew who they were talking about. He remembered the names from the family tree, even the sons' names. You are a descendant of Artos the Implacable? He asked, completely stunned. The man in front of him chuckled a little. Yes, he was my great-grandfather, although my mother told me he never liked that name. My grandfather was his youngest son Benjen. He looked at the man once more and only now he fully observed the man's grey eyes. All other parts of both his build and facial characteristics were plain, but the eyes were unmistakably stark grey. They had the exact same color as his father's and Arya's. John's were a bit darker, but still unmistakably related. The eyes, he mumbled to himself. At this the man smiled. Yes, I have my mother's eyes. Stark eyes she called them. The man said proudly. Suddenly he saw the man look at him in shock and embarrassment, clearly realizing that the Stark king he had spoken those words to did not have this trait. Yes, Stark eyes indeed. Don't worry Roderick, everyone knows I favor my mother in coloring. It's nothing to fuss about. Inside I am all Stark, the rest doesn't matter. He laughed it off. The man was clearly relieved by his reaction and bowed his head a little. Now let us continue. I know the story of Artos, I have even seen his statue in the crypts. Quite unusual for the brother of the Lord to have a statue. I also knew he had two sons and my father once told me I had distant kin in Barrowton, but I never put them together. I know nothing of the story of your grandfather and his brother, let alone their descendants, would you care to tell it to me? He got the story back on track. He was very interested in this story. How did Starks happen to end up in Barrowton and were there any Starks left? Of course, your grace. The man smiled, clearly happy with his interest in the matter. After Artos returned from the battle at Long Lake, he was immensely popular. He served his young nephew Lord Edwyle dutifully as regent for a few years before he died. In recognition of this and his victory, Edwyle had a statue built for him in the crypts. He was urged to do this by his other uncles Errold, who was a member of the Night's Watch, and Roderick, the Wandering Wolf, another ancestor of yours. After his death, a power struggle over the regency broke out between Artos' sons, Roderick and Lord Edwyle's mother, Lady Melantha. She was a Blackwood. He responded, remembering his family tree. Indeed, she was. Roderick smiled, before continuing. Lady Melantha won out in the end and a rift between the branches of House Stark was made. Errold seldom visited Winterfell after and Roderick went to Essos and joined the Second Sons, a tale you will probably know. He nodded, as the story of the Wandering Wolf had been a favorite of his John's, of Arya as well. Errold died at the wall and the rift between Roderick and Edwyle was later mended through the marriage of Edwyle's only son Lord Rickard to Roderick's daughter Lyra. My grandparents. He mused. Roderick nodded. Yes, they were your Lord Father's parents. However, the rift between Artos' sons and Edwyle's line was never mended. After Lady Melantha became regent, both left for Barrowton. They were welcomed there, as Lady Dustin had been a sister of their mother Lysara. Artos Stark had amassed some wealth during his service for his lordly brothers and nephew. The brothers split this amongst themselves. Brandon, being the eldest, got the largest part. Brandon, with his share, bought some lands on the border between Dustin Land and that of their vassals the Stouts. He married a cousin from House Ryswell and had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. His eldest son Artos was betrothed to a niece of Lord Ironsmith but died in an accident when he was 20. His younger brother Donner had taken his vows with the Night's Watch only a year before, but there was no way back. He died on arranging around a decade later. As such, the male line of Arto's branch died, as my grandfather had only daughters. Brandon's daughter Asa inherited his lands and married the brother of Lord Stout. She died a long time ago, but they still have descendants. One of her sons, Benfred, died in the rebellion, the other Ronald Stout, still rules the lands and has sons of his own who have joined you on your march south. Roderick continued. He tried to let all of it sink in. There were no male Starks left, but from the female line he had cousins, more than he could have imagined. It seems as this was only Brandon's line. What about your grandfather's line? He asked, very interested in this story. He would have to meet all of them. However distant, they were sort of kin. My grandfather married a cousin of House Flint of Flint's Finger. My grandmother was a feisty woman and she hated Ironborn above all else. With his inheritance money and dowry, my father bought multiple shops in Barrowton and established himself in the city. The businesses did well and so he expanded in trade after a while. Nothing big, but he used the family connections to trade between Dustin, Roswell and Flint lands. His distant kinsman started explaining once more. My grandparents got 3 daughters. The eldest, my mother, married my father denies Dustin out of love. My grandfather only allowed it because of his Dustin descent. My father soon joined my grandfather in the business and became his right hand for dealing with trade. He also served as a favorable link to Barrow Hall after the old lady Dustin had died. The story continued and he had to think about his father's ideas for infrastructure and trade in the lower regions of the north. Benjen Stark's family seemed to embody everything his father had wanted, albeit on a much smaller scale. Due to their name and considerable dowries, my aunts married well. The second daughter Birina married the third son of Lord Tallheart and established trade with Torrens Square. However, she soon died in childbirth and the link with House Tallheart disappeared, although the trade stayed. The youngest daughter Ardil married a younger brother of Lord Slate. She had one daughter Margaret Slate, before dying from a sickness. The daughter married a vassal of House Slate and she has children, but I am not in contact with her. Finally, my parents had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. My brother Benjicott Dustin died fighting at the Trident. My sister Birina married a Barrow knight named Sir Helman Hornblower. Sir Helman died in the Greyjoy Rebellion. He was struck down as he saved my life. They have a son named Cregan, who is squiring for one of his father's friends. He joined with this knight on Lord Domeric's raid. It saddens me to hear so many of your family have died in service of my house. You honor me by still coming south when I asked. He replied, shocked to see what the recent wars had done to this man's family, his own family. He supposed all northern families were like this. As he remembered that a lot of his friends had lost family in the rebellion or on the Iron Isles. Now here they were, fighting another war and losing good men. Where would it end? No honor is greater than serving Winterfell and House Stark, your grace. Especially a Stark king. The only thing I regret is that my father and grandfather aren't alive anymore to see it. They would have wept with joy. House Dustin and House Stark have lost a lot in the south, just as the whole north has. To finally free ourselves from their shackles is worth the pain the south has caused us twice over. The man said to him and he looked dead serious. It took him aback a little, but he silently vowed to never let the north be chained again, as long as he lived. He couldn't do that to these people who had lost their family for it. And you? Tell me about yourself. Do you have a family? He finally asked, as the silence became too long. I do, your grace. I married a woman named Lysa, from House Grey Barrow. They are another sworn house sworn to the Dustins. They aren't particularly large or wealthy, but they are old and respected. My wife gave me 2 sons, William and Denise. The oldest, William, is 12 and Denise is 9. They are both safe in Barrowton. I took over the trade network from my father and grandfather. We still own some of the businesses, but some have gone to the Hornblowers as part of my sister's dowry. Our main focus is trade now. They have good and strong Dustin names. He smiled at Rockerick, who smiled back. Yes, your grace. They were named after the late lord and my father respectively. If I may be honest, your grace. I served your lord father in both his wars, as I serve you now. I am proud of it too, but after this war I hope for peace. War is bad for trade and I would like to see my sons raised without the need for them to take up a sword. Roderick said honestly, and he could see both the resolve and the hope in the man's eyes. I hope so too, Roderick. My queen is high pregnant now and I hope my child will know peace as much as yours. The Dustin man nodded appreciatively but remained quiet. You have given me a lot to think about, Roderick. If you would be so kind to hand me a family tree of Arto's descendants in the next few days, it would be greatly appreciated. I would like to know this distant family of mine. If your nephew or any of your cousins come back to the army, I would appreciate it if you sought another audience with me. I would like to meet my distant kin. The man bowed low. Me and my family are deeply honored to be considered as such, Your Grace. I will do as you ask. How may I deliver you the family tree? Give it to my brother, if you see him. He will like to see it anyway. You are his kin as well. He responded simply. Happy because of the man's story and loyalty. Nonetheless he was becoming tired. Of course, Your Grace. I will deliver it soon. The man said with another bow as he left the room. He appreciated the silence the room gave him, as he looked upon the wood of the small oaken table in front of him. He thought about his family tree. His family had just gotten a whole lot bigger. He tried to remember if there were any more branches he should be aware of. After long thinking he decided to map it off at Stark, William and Arto's father. After that, most of the north was family. All he could think about was some distant Royce cousins he didn't really know about, and he vowed to ask Lord Yone in his next letter. Besides that, only family from the female lines existed. Houses Locke, Flint, Blackwood and Royce came to mind, and he would ask around for that. Bran had already told him about the Blackwood connection, and his father had said some words about his grandmothers, but he would ask for more. They had just managed to free Sir Donal Locke in a prisoner exchange, so he could ask him when he rejoined the Foot. He felt tired and laid on the bed. He turned on his side and put his right hand beneath his pillow. He quickly fell asleep. He dreamed of House Stark having a big family and being connected to most of the North's houses. Many youths and children were running around, and some of them sported his red hair or blue eyes. He smiled in his sleep, as he was pulled even deeper into his dreams. Chapter 30, Angering a Giant. 299 AC. Rob. He hated the waiting much more than the pain from the wound. The wound was severe but recovery was good, as his arm and shoulder were healing well. He was now able to move freely around the castle, although he still fatigued quickly. Even with the good progress, practicing in the yard or campaigning was still a long way off, and he hated it. The troops were getting more and more restless. Sending the Dustin, Bolton and Riswell troops on raids had helped for a while, but soon the same problems erupted. Men started fighting amongst each other out of boredom and were losing their edge. The biggest problems that had erupted had included free men, although his Northmen were also on edge. He already sent out 2 groups of 150 Freys to raid the countryside close to the crag. Blackwalder had gone north, to the yet untouched lands of Westerling that bordered House Banefort. He was tasked in raiding the area, with his focus on the Banefort border. He would also need to gather intelligence on the state of that Westerlander house. His force was too small to threaten any towns, so he would be attacking defenseless fishing, farming and mining villages mostly. The same went for Sir Raymond Frey. He was to scour the land beneath the Pendrick Hills between the crag and Castamaria for anything they might have missed. He also had to take out 1 or 2 knightly houses that lived in the area. They had close connections to the Spicers and he wanted them gone for it. All in all, he didn't let the Freys get far. He wanted to keep them close so he could keep an eye out on what they did. He was almost certain that Blackwalder would commit atrocities, but he had done all he could to limit it to a minimum. He also didn't want to split off his force more than he already had. Of the over 6,000 men that he had taken west, some 600 had either died or been wounded so severely that they couldn't fight anymore. Of the remaining men only 2,000 remained with him now. This was not enough for comfort. It would change soon. The army would soon march to Castamaria, where it would branch in 2. He and a garrison force would go on to Ashmark. He would reunite with Os and take control there. They would take with them all the spoils of their campaign. He would take inventory of all they had and start planning a way to transport everything to the Riverlands. Lady Mormont had already brought most of the raided cattle and some small loot to Riverrun and was on her way back to Ashmark, but all the other plunder was still in the west with them. At Castamaria the force would be joined by the forces under Galbart Glover and Harry. This would swell the numbers of the army considerably. He would take their spoils with him as well. On the road, the main force would be joined by the Great Yon before laying siege to Sarsfield. Even with the garrisons he left and the Riswells, Boltons and Dustins still raiding, the army should number around 4,000 men. That should be more than enough to take Sarsfield. If they did get news that Tywine broke through, the army would pull back and regroup with all other forces at Ashmark. He was really annoyed that he wouldn't be able to lead the army himself. However, the army couldn't wait on him anymore. He was not fit enough to march at a high pace or to siege a castle, let alone fight for one. He would already slow the march on the way to Castamaria, after that someone else would have to lead. He had thought about who to send for a while, but his mind had drifted towards Jon every time. His brother would lead, with the Great Yon, Harry, Sir Brynden and Lord Galbart as his sub-commanders. The Northerners would accept it, he knew. The Riverlanders would be harder. He would get all of them to heel, just the phrase would be a problem. Even with their losses, they still numbered around 700 men. That was a very considerable amount of his men. 150 of them would remain here to garrison the crag under Sir Rodger. They would be taking almost anything of value from here, so it was more of an empty title. The chance also was that if Blackwalder angered the Baneforts too much, he would need to hold them off in their revenge. They had restored, restocked and fortified the crag in advance. 150 prepared men would be able to hold off the Baneforts for a while. The raiding phrase would rejoin him on the march, although he secretively hoped Sir Rodger was going to keep many of his kinsmen here. He sat at the desk that had been previously owned by Lord Westerling when the novice, who was filling in as Maester, walked in with letters. Both were clearly sent on from Riverrun and they came from the north. He read the first one, a letter written by Lord Hornwood. It was sent from Torrens Square where he mentioned that an Ironborn force had been laying siege. The Ironborn were smashed and 2/3 of their number killed or captured. Good, some justice for the Tall Hearts after Benfred's death. In the letter, he formally asked him to legitimize his bastard son Lance Snow as Lance Hornwood. The boy himself was stuck in Deepwood Motte for now, but Lord Hornwood intended for him to be raised as his heir after the war. On the march, he had already spoken to Galbart about the boy and everything seemed all right with him. He would grant Lord Hornwood the honor, hopefully it could stabilize House Hornwood for future generations. The gods knew Lord Harleys and his family deserved it. Then he opened the other letter, sent from Winterfell, and the content shocked him. Theon attacked his home and his family. Luckily the attack was repelled, but his sister was wounded. Moreover, Lyanna Mormont was severely wounded and Alara Umber had died. How could this happen? Theon. He quickly called the guard to bring Jon, Daisy Mormont, Small Jon Umber and Sir Wendell Marndaly to him. It all concerned their families and they should know the news first. When all men had arrived, he handed them the letter. The anger on their faces became visible after each one had been given the letter. The last one to read it was the Small Jon. After reading about his sister, the giant man screamed and roared like the sigil of his house. At one point he took out his great sword and cut some nice oak wooden cut cabinet of Lord Westerling to pieces. Sir Robin Flint, who had been on duty in front of his door, stormed in with his sword in hand and tried to subdue their friend. The Small Jon just threw him across the room. The Unchained Giant indeed. It took all of them combined, combining both talking and restraining him, to calm him down enough to talk. We will make them pay, Umber. I promise you. We will make them all pay. Daisy vowed. Oh, I will do more than that, Daisy. I will scour their islands until there is nothing left except rocks and bones. I will burn their villages, take their women and put salt on their fields. I will kill every one of those Ironborn, even if it costs me my life. I will make their islands uninhabitable for generations and the horror stories about them enough to keep men away from those islands for 1,000 years. This and more I swear by the old gods. his giant friend said menacingly, as he stared in front of him with hard eyes. They were all taken aback by this. You didn't swear lightly by the old gods, everyone knew this. There was no way back for their friend now. He tried to reach him another way for now. Umber, there are no Ironborn here. If there were, I would give them to you. There are only Lannisters here. Keep your vengeance and your anger for the right time. The Ironborn's time will come, I promise you, but now there is not much we can do. His friend looked down on him. You promise we will have our vengeance? He asked. I do. First of all, we will throw those Ironborn from our coasts and into the sea to their false god. After that, and when we have dealt with the Lannisters, their time will come. They have created problems for far too long. He vowed. His friend nodded. There are no Ironborn here now, and we'll never get across to their islands without a strong fleet. They will have to wait, for now. However, my vengeance must still be sated. These Westerlanders have killed enough of my friends as it is, so they'll do. I ask permission to gather the 200 Umbermen stationed here and go raid some Westerlander villages, Your Grace. I need to blow off some steam. Good idea, Umber. Me and the 100 men from Bear Island under my control will join you. Daisy immediately added. He looked over to his friends and saw the pain and the hurt written all over their faces. Alera was dead, Lyanna could as well have been. Could he really forbid them this? Besides knowing the Smallgen, would he listen? Was this worth taking the risk of creating a rift between them? He couldn't allow them to challenge his command, but would this be a good cause to fight them on it? He stood there, silently looking at his friends for a few seconds. I will allow it, under certain conditions. He responded carefully, after the moment's silence. The Smallgen led a low grunt in response, but he said nothing. You may go, together. On the condition you go where I want you to go, and you promise to be in Castemaria 8 days from now. He explained sharply. Both nodded to him. There is a small knightly house, House Lavat, on the coast some 25 miles west from Castemaria. Domeric stated that they have tried multiple times to disrupt communications from his and Lord Glover's men. They have killed numerous of our outriders and even unsuccessfully attacked Lord Glover's rear with some of their allies. I want you to take their hold fast and burn it to the ground to show all local houses what happens when they defy us. Take any member of the family you find captive and bring them with you to Castemaria. After burning the hold fast, raid their lands as long as you want, as long as you get to the meeting in time. He stated, adding the part at the end sharply. Both of them nodded and left the room. He heard Smallgen snarl to Daisy. We depart at first light, Mormont. Don't be late. Was that smart, Rob? John asked him, breaking his silence for the first time since he had read the letter. Maybe not, but it wasn't worth the risk. Besides, House Lavat has been a small thorn in my side anyway, and it is close to Castemaria. Better for them to have a useful outlet for their anger. At this explanation, John nodded. He was clearly still shaken by the news of Arya's and Nymaria's wounds. The Smallgen exaggerated, but he is right on one thing, Your Grace. Something needs to be done about the Ironborn. Attacking Winterfell at night, even the Ironborn of old that ruled from Bear Island to the Arbor were never that bold. Sir Wendell stated. He nodded in response. Something will be done. At this very moment, the clans are moving to throw them out of Gloverlands, and the force around Torrens Square has been decisively beaten back. The Ryswells and Tall Hearts are working on expanding the defenses on their coasts, and the Dustins and Mormonts are also taking precautions. The only weak link for now is the Stony Shore, but it will be taken care of. The real nut we need to crack is Moat Cailin, the others will be thrown back from our shores soon enough. Sir Wendell nodded, somewhat pleased at his response. He too seemed angry. His niece Wyla was fine, but she had been in danger when that should never have happened. He ended the meeting for now and asked John to stay with him. They had the road from Castemaria to Sarsfield and so much more to plan together. 4 days later. He sat at the dark oaken desk of Lord Westerling and thought once more about the strategy of the war. Grey Wind was out hunting for a last time, as he knew his companion wanted to be with him on the march. Ever since he had been wounded, the direwolf seemed to be even more protective than before. They were on the verge of leaving towards Castamaria. Most likely they would depart tomorrow. This wasn't made easy though, as news from elsewhere kept coming in. News had come from Dom 2 days ago that he had rounded the Straits of Feral and was raiding within 25 miles of Case. He assured him that he had appointed many outriders and would not be surprised by House Kenning or one of their vassals. Domeric intended to measure House Kenning's remaining strength and resolve. If they were to attack them later, the news would come in handy. For now, it seemed that the house was weak. Maybe not all too surprising, as a few Kenning banners had been seen at Oxcross. They had also received news from the Vale over the past few days. Fighting there had finally erupted, after what seemed like a phase of war where everybody had prepared their troops. The first fighting seemed to happen all over the Vale. House Royce had fought minor border skirmishes with House Grafton, as the latter sought a way to leave their territory to link up with its allies. House Royce seemed to have had the better of the engagements, as House Grafton still seemed contained to Gulltown. However, they had used their fleet to attack small ports loyal to the Royces and as such kept things in balance. The Lindelys had also clashed with House Coldwater. Here the latter had been soundly beaten, although the Lindelys were unable to march on Coldwater Burn. Still, their allies were hard-pressed and lacked allies in the region. The Belmares were marching to help them, but they had to pass through Corbray lands to do so. The Corbrays seemed to be playing both sides and passing through their lands without angering them seemed to be a difficult task. The Templetons had ambushed the Breakstones on their way to reinforce the Uri. Sir Edmund Breakstone had died and most his force was destroyed. Sir Simon Templeton had marched on and united with Houses Hunter and Waynwood. Together they had laid siege to the Gates of the Moon and had cut off the Uri. This was great news, as House Arryn hadn't been able to fully mobilize their forces yet. As such, most were trapped in their sieged castles while the remainder was being picked off one by the besieging force. Still an Arryn force was gathering at the Bloody Gate, intent on breaking the siege of the Uri. Lord Yone mentioned that it was comprised of parts of the Arryn Levi, together with troops from House Egan. Although it was growing, Bronze Yone assured him they didn't have the men to break the siege for now. More to the south, House Waxel had marched north from Wickenden to try and link up with either the Arryns or Graftons. They had been blocked by House Redfort and a contingent of House Royce in doing so. No battle had happened yet, but House Waxel seemed successfully pinned in the Bay of Crabs for the moment. All in all, it seemed the war in the Vale was going well for them. If the Royces managed to draw out and defeat House Grafton, none of his aunt's allies would be strong enough to challenge Lord Yone. He would keep following the war in the Vale, but for now there was nothing he could do to help them. He had his own battles to fight in the west. Everything was running as planned. Provisions had been planned and soldiers had already broken up parts of the camp. Even that fool Sir Origafrey seemed pleased with his appointment as Castellan of the Crag. He looked over a map from the Westerlands, for what seemed like the 100th time, to check if his strategy was sound. As he was studying the valley between Sarsfield and Lannisport, he was disturbed by a knock on the door. "The novice is here with another letter, Your Grace." His guard called out. "Let him in." He called back. The young novice walked in and handed him the letter. The young man still wasn't used to his new role, although he performed it adequately. The letter was from Riverrun. He thanked the novice and waited for him to leave before opening it. He read through it. The news they had all feared had come. Uncle Edmure had tried to stop the Lannister army at the fords as Uncle Brynden predicted. He seemed to have succeeded. He read the letter again, more slowly this time. To King Robb. Tywin Lannister tried to march west to stop you in your campaign. I have rallied the Riverlords and successfully managed to stop them at the fords. The Lannisters initially probed our defenses along the length of the line. 3 days later they attacked across multiple points. In the fighting, we managed to capture Sir Harrock Kenning and Sir Jason Serret. The Lannisters suffered heavy losses along the whole line, although the heaviest fighting happened at Stone Mill. Lord Tywin had sent 2 of his veteran sellsword companies across the river there, supported by Westerlanders mostly of houses Lefford and Serret. The sellswords managed to gain the west bank for a time, before the reserves and I managed to beat them back. Lord Lefford drowned in the fighting, as one of the sellsword companies was almost entirely destroyed. Another company lost its commander in the fighting upstream. Sir Robert Brax also died in the fighting. In the end our losses were less than 1,000, dead and wounded included. Most of these fell at Stone Mill. The Lannisters probably suffered close to 4,000. About half of those would be sellswords Tywin brought over from Essos. The Lannisters' army was last seen marching southeast. I do not think they will try to cross again. This leaves you free in your campaign in the west. Your uncle, Sir Edmure Tully, heir to Riverrun. He sighed again. They had prepared for this outcome beforehand, but still it angered him. He had ordered Edmure to stay put and defend Riverrun. Now he had done the opposite. He had not been able to tell his uncle about his plan to lure Lord Tywin west, as he couldn't risk the Raven falling into enemy hands and spoiling his plans and positioning. Still, he had expected his uncle to obey his command, until he got Lord Rickard's letter that was. If only he had known about Lord Renly's death and Lord Stannis' march before he went west, then he could have informed Edmure and King's Landing might fall in the next few weeks. It still might, and he sincerely hoped Lord Stannis managed to pull it off. He would hope. Lord Stannis was a great commander after all. Still they would have to make the best of it. It gave them free rein in the west at least. Maybe they could pull off threatening Lannisport after all. He stood up and walked to the door. He opened it and asked one of his guards to gather all his commanders. They would need to be told this as soon as possible. The army would leave on the morrow. They missed their opportunity to catch Lord Tywin, they couldn't miss any more time now. They had to do as much damage in the west as possible. Maybe they could start testing the vassals' loyalties to the Lannisters. They had been marching for a few days and would be arriving at the ruins of Castemaria in an hour. He was seated in a wheelhouse, as he could only endure to ride for a few hours a day with his wound. He hated the damn thing, even though he always had one of his friends to keep him company. He had begrudgingly placed himself in the wheelhouse again at midday and would change to his horse soon. He wanted to have the strength to ride into the camp at Castemaria, as some of his men hadn't seen him since before his wound and it wouldn't do show weakness so soon. He talked with To about their families and his brother-in-law was clearly happy to see his brother again. He had missed Harry too, if he was honest. The man was the closest thing that he would ever have to a protective older brother and he knew he could always count on him. Even when he was a boy and had done something wrong, or when he was fooling around with Alis, he could always count on Harry to help him and keep his secrets. Half an hour later, he was helped onto his horse by his men. He rode on for the remainder of the journey. Next to him rode his brother and Sir Brynden. Lord Rickard had taught him the value of appearance very quickly. It was important for the troops to see him and the commanders that he valued as strong and united. They rode into the camp as a sign of strength. His crown was held proudly on his head. His brother rode very clearly on his right side, with Sir Brynden as his representative of the Riverlands on the left. His message screamed unity in his family and between the North and the Riverlands and he hoped it would make another impression on his men. To finish the picture, they were flanked by Grey Wind and Ghost. Behind them rode nobles of most northern families, as well as houses Blackwood, Free and Deadings. He rode through the camp and everywhere his soldiers shouted praises and encouragement, while others bent the knee deeply. Shouts of the young wolf, the North and Stark were everywhere. Winterfell, the Blackfish and even the White Wolf were heard to a lesser extent. The last one made him smile, his brother deserved the praise. It would also make his command easier. He reached the center of the camp, where he saw that a big grey tent with the running direwolf on it had already been erected. In front of it was an open square where most of his commanders stood waiting for him. As he got from his horse with a little subtle help from Jon and Grey Wind, all went down to one knee. He saw Harry, Dacey, Smalljon and Lord Glover. However, there were many more. Lord Flint had joined Lord Galbart on his raid, as a tall Hart cousin and their cavalry commander had joined Harry. Behind them, many more of their lower vassals went to their knee as well. He quickly asked them all to stand up. He hugged Harry and saw how he had a small scar on his left arm. His brother-in-law saw him looking and smiled. Courtesy of some Westerlander knight, a cousin to Lord Harmel. All I can say is that Lord Harmel is a cousin short now. The last part was added with a mean grin, but he was just glad Harry was fine. Dacey and the Smalljon greeted him next. I feared you wouldn't make it on time, he simply said. We promised we'd be here, didn't we? The Smalljan grinned, but he looked tired. You look tired, Umber. What happened? Nothing much, Your Grace. We got a little too carried away on the task you gave us, that's all. Rode halfway through the night to get here on time. We only arrived just this morning. The heir to last half said matter-of-factly. He nodded, having expected this after his antics last time he saw him. He obeyed his orders and seemed to have calmed down, that was the most important thing. How about that task I gave you? He asked, coming to the matter at hand. House Lovat's keep is no more, Your Grace. Their lands were still burning when we left the place yesterday. Their women and children have been taken captive and have been put together with the other prisoners, over there at the entrance of the old mines. The heir to last half explained, as he pointed to the mine entrance. We left an adequate message for any to find who dare look for them. I don't expect any more problems in that area with the few other remaining houses, Your Grace. Smalljan replied, clearly still angry but proud of his achievement. It was clear that he had made the house pay for their defiance in a savage way. He had to remind himself, friend or no, this was the heir of House Umber he was speaking to. The house from last hearth was fiercely loyal to him and his family and he had nothing to fear from them, but still rumors persisted about them partaking in the ritual of the first night. There were also gruesome stories about the punishments they inflicted on captured wildlings, although none explicitly forbidden by his father. The stories were still gruesome. The Karstarks were much the same. He knew Lord Ricard and Harry had tried to shield him from the most gruesome incidents, but that hadn't always been possible. He still remembered how Lord Ricard had dealt justice to a band of wildlings that had raided the north of the Karstarks' lands. He had just been 14 at the time. The 5 remaining men had been beheaded, as the law prescribed. Their heads had rolled in the name of his father and King Robert. It was what the Lord of House Karstark had done after that had shocked him. He had chopped the heads of the wildlings that had died in the fight and hung all their headless bodies from trees along his border to discourage any more raids. He could still see the entrails hang from their bodies as they swayed in the wind. When he had protested, Lord Ricard had said nothing. They had taken a 2-day detour to a village that had been burned out by that wilderling warband. The gruesome sight of it had made his stomach empty. Then Lord Ricard had come up to him and put a hand on his shoulder. Hard lands create hard people, young Rob. If we did not hang them as a warning, another band could come in next week. Their friends would do this again and again, until we caught them or chased them back to the wall as well. Sometimes it is necessary to be as hard and cruel as your enemies to protect your own people. I hope you understand now. It was this advice that rang in his head when he looked up into the eyes of his giant friend. He kept his gaze for a while and simply asked. What happened to the men of House Lovat? It's Knight and his brothers and cousins. Sadly, none survived the fighting, Your Grace. His friend said, small defiance in his eyes. He knew that the Umber heir was lying, and his friend knew that he knew. They just locked eyes for a moment, until he said. That's a pity. At least they can't bother any of our men anymore. We will need the communication lines to the crag to remain open. It wasn't worth it. The most important thing was that he had spared the women and the children. If something had happened to them, then he couldn't have let it slide this easily. Still, he was surprised to see something in his friend's eyes. It was almost like a sort of newfound respect. As if his friend now acknowledged that he could make the hard choices. When he thought back on it, he had seen the same in his eyes and those of some other commanders when he had decided to send Lord Tywine Sir Jaime's sword hand. Honor is a good thing for peace times, but in war it is only victory and survival that counts. Lord Ricard used to say. He disliked all of it and he knew his father would too, but he believed it to be necessary nonetheless. He looked over to Daisy and saw much the same expressions on her face, as he had in Smalljan's. The wild she-bear of Bear Island had obviously partaken in whatever it was they had done together. Welcome back, Daisy. He greeted her and she smiled back. Then he went on to greet Lord Galbart. Greetings, Lord Glover. How did your expedition go? Very well, Your Grace. I'm glad to be back with the army. We started to have difficulty transporting all the loot and prisoners we caught. He smiled, although he could see the smile didn't reach his eyes. The man was probably worried sick about his home being under siege. Still, he performed his job loyally and adequately, and he wouldn't forget that. Great to hear that. I would love to hear all the details of your adventures soon. He responded. Lord Glover just bowed his head in recognition of his answer. He went on to greet the other commanders and minor lords. He knew how important it was for them to be acknowledged by him, as they normally didn't deal with House Stark directly. After greeting everyone, he addressed his commanders once more. I propose we all meet in my tent in 2 hours. This may give the men that came with me the time to start setting up camp. We will discuss all details of what happened and the coming plan there. The meeting had gone by in a blur. Together with the Westerlings and some of their knightly houses that had been captured, they now apparently transported 263 prisoners. They were comprised of 37 knights, 14 other men, 89 women and 121 children. The most notable were 5 heads of landed knightly houses, 17 heirs and Sir Reynold, the heir of the lordly house Westerling. In total they had, mostly through wives and pages they had found in the keeps, members of 41 knightly houses and 4 lordly houses, although 2 of the latter were only cousins. All in all, they had captured the soft underbelly of the lower nobility of the Westerlands. Even if they couldn't sway the big lords, they might be able to sway the smaller houses into desertion. Still, the captives were all relatively low on the noble ladder. The good thing about it was that what they had now could create total anarchy in some parts of the West for years. They had successfully taken the majority of the nobles in about a fifth of the Westerlands, although they failed to gain any great names. To create shockwaves in Casterly Rock, they had to capture more castles and members of bigger families. His lords had accepted his plan for Sarsfield, they had also accepted Jon in command. The army would rest here for 5 more days, as he went through the loot and how to transport it to Ashmark. After that they would split. Both Harry and Lord Galbart had done an excellent job. Together they had broken any resistance along the Straits of Fair Isle. They had taken almost everyone and everything of value there and opened the way for Dom to go even further. 1 or 2 small silver mines were even hit. The total amount of loot, together with that of the free incursions and their own capture of the crag, were staggering. Thinking he still had to add the loot House Umber had already stashed away in Ashmark made him stagger. Only then did he realize how the Bolton and Riswell raids could still bring in more. They also heard troubling news while they stayed there. It seemed the Great Jon had heard the news of the death of his daughter too. His reaction had been even harsher than his son's one was. Stories trickled in of how 2 entire villages were wiped off the map. Men, women and children were allegedly put to the sword without quarter. Besides that, he seemed to have wiped out a knightly house sworn to House Sarsfield as well. The Lord of Last Hearth had sent a message ahead, but it only said that he was already raiding the lands of House Sarsfield and would scout the area for possible relief forces. He would join the main force on the march to the castle. He had discussed it at length with Jon. They had come to the conclusion that there was nothing they could do for now. The Great Jon would be reprimanded behind closed doors when Robb rejoined the army. In the meantime, Jon would make sure it didn't happen again. He tried to put the thoughts about those people to bed and threw himself on the task of finding a new way to bring the loot back to Riverrun the coming weeks. If they took the small trail they had come by, it could take weeks to transport it all. There had to be a better way. He spent the next few days doing just that, until finally he had to bid his brother goodbye. He himself would leave in the wheelhouse with a few hundred men, the loot and the prisoners. Jon would take the rest to Sarsfield with him. Their goodbye was short but meaningful. Not everything needed to be said out loud for it to be understood. When the vanguard had passed out of sight, all that was heard was grey winds howling goodbye. He might have imagined it, but somehow, he seemed to feel Ghost's silent reply. It was both sad and anxious, as well as full of resolve. Ironically, he thought, that was very similar to how Jon himself was feeling. Chapter 31, The Family Grows. 299 AC. Jon. They had been marching for just over 2 days. Their pace had significantly increased, now that all the loot and wounded had left with Robb. This morning he rode with Lord Flint. His father had taught him that it was important for his men to know their commander. Therefore, he adopted his tactic of rotating the men he ate and rode with every day. As such, he was starting to understand the priorities of all the northern nobility a lot better. Lord Flint was, not so subtly, inquiring to him about his prospects after the war. He had just started talking about his idea of helping Ned's son to look for a wife, when a dust cloud was seen on the horizon. Both stopped talking, as they stood up on their stirrups to get a better look. Quickly enough, it was clear that it was Sir Bryndon returning with some more men at his back. He signalled to his men to stand down, although he kept them close. It took a few minutes to reach the group of men, as they slowly rode towards them. All this time, he was relieved Lord Flint didn't start talking about a possible wife for him again. When the group finally arrived, he saw how the Great Yon was proudly riding next to Sir Bryndon. Although he seemed somewhat restless, as he kept looking over them in search for something, or someone. "John, Lord Flint, it's good to see you." The Great Yon boomed as he nodded to both of them. "As good as it is to see you again, Lord Umber," he responded cordially. The Great Yon was probably the biggest contestant to his command. He couldn't show any weakness now or he could be in trouble. "I am sorry for your loss. We will avenge her and make the Ironborn pay." Robb swore to it. He said, better to be done with it now. He couldn't let the subject sour relations within the force. The Great Yon snapped his neck towards him with a scowl. The anger and sadness in his face was clear for all to see at the mention of his daughter. After staring for a while, he replied. "Aye. That's good. That's good. House Umber can always count on the Starks. That's for sure. She was a good and lively little thing, my Alara." His voice sounded distant while he said it, as he started staring over the horizon. Soon he came back to himself. "Aye, we'll make them pay. Robert Baratheon made a mistake leaving those squids in control of those islands. We won't make that mistake again. I helped capture those islands before under Ned, I can do the same under his son. I will make those rocks burn in a way that the story of rape of the sisters sounds like a fucking children's tale," the giant man said as his voice filled again with anger and bravado. "Aye, we will, Lord Umber, but for now we have the Lannisters to deal with," he simply replied. He was glad that the man was still so openly loyal to Robb, even combined with his antics. He and Robb had discussed the possibility that he could be angry with them, as Alara had been under House Stark's guardianship. "Aye, that's why I'm here. Now if you'll excuse me, I want to see my son." "Where is that boy?" the Lord boomed. Although it could be perceived as a slight to be dismissed like that, he didn't respond. The man had just lost his daughter and had all the while been separated from his other children. It was only logical he wanted to see his heir at the first chance he got. He was just about to answer that Smalljan was further back down the line, when he heard a few horses race next to the column behind him. As he turned around, he saw the Umber heir and 3 of his guards storm towards them. "Good to see you, father." Son called towards father with a grin, as he pulled hard on the reins. A huge smile broke out on the Great Yon's face, as he saw his son was unhurt. The man jumped from his horse, as his son followed suit. The two giants crashed together in a bear hug hard enough to knock even the sturdiest warriors out cold. "How are you doing, lad?" the Great Yon asked. "Fine, father. I took the news hard, but I let off some steam since." His heir replied with fire in his eyes. "Aye. You did. The Starks let you?" the Lord of Last Hearth inquired with mild surprise in his voice. "Aye, they gave me a mission for it. I took out some knightly house that was tampering with our supply and communication lines together with the Mormonts. Safe to say they won't hurt anyone anymore." The Smalljan replied grimly. "Good, good." The father mused as he stroked his beard. "Mormonts are good folk, that they are. I won't forget that." Then the man turned and looked straight into his eyes. "Won't forget that you gave him something to put his mind off either. I did so myself as well." He just stared back at the Umber Lord. He couldn't say anything in front of the other men, so he just stayed silent. "How's Uncle Roderick?" the Smalljan asked his father. "He's fine. I gave him control of the force as I rode towards you." "Did you hear anything from your brother or other uncle?" the Great Yon asked, still clearly concerned about his family. It seems Harmond helped Lord Carstark win a minor victory in Maidenpool. Took out some sellswords or the like. They were back safe at the Twins when they sent word. Uncle Osric stayed there to keep the remaining men in check. His friend replied. Your brother won a battle, eh? Great. Then we have something to drink to tonight. Now let us discuss the rest along the road, son. Seems like we're holding up an entire army. The giant man grinned as he looked around him. He clapped his son on the back once more and got back on his horse. They fell in behind all the other nobles, which they greeted quickly before chatting away amongst one another. He'd give them their time together. They would have to be serious again soon enough. 5 days later. John. He walked outside his tent, after he had donned on his armor. The camp felt empty, as most of the men had already left to take up their positions. He met with his commanders at the front of the camp for a final time to discuss their attack as they looked upon their objective. The castle of Sarsfield was situated on the south side of the green and fertile valley that dominated the northern Westerlands. To the north of the castle lay fertile plains. House Sarsfield, as made evident by their sigil, was specialized in archers and more specifically horse archers. Usually, these fields were used to breed the horses for House Sarsfield's army, but now they served as the perfect place for their camp. Besides that, they had captured some of the war horses as well. They would be very useful in the upcoming campaigns. Sarsfield lay closely along the river road, which ran from west to east along the castle's south side. Its main gates had been built along the east and west sides of the castle to accommodate easy travel along both sides of the river road. A smaller, well-protected gate also stood on the north side, to ease travel to the pastures over there. They had chosen to swing around and attack the castle from multiple sides. The Umbers and Mormonts would lead the attack on the north side of the castle, just opposite their camp. They would scale the wall with ropes and makeshift ladders under the command of the Great Jon. The phrase, under Blackwalder, would do the same thing on the south side. He himself would lead the main assault with a ram on the east gate, while the Carstarks and Glovers assaulted the east walls next to the gate to deny the veteran archers a possibility to fire on him and his men and stop their gate from falling. Sir Brynden was in control of the reserve cavalry, and it was his task to be alert to the possibility of any relief forces arriving, although he seriously doubted that possibility. He talked to all the nobles gathered, and when no objections were made to the plan, he tasked everyone to go to their respective detachments. He himself rode to the troops gathered on the east side. He rode on until he reached the big direwolf banner in the center and dismounted. There he met Lords Flint and the heir to House Slate, who would assist him in his task to capture the gate. He looked upon the grey granite walls of the castle and inhaled slowly. He waited so Blackwalder could return to his men in time for the attack. Above the castle, he saw an eagle fly peacefully, and he wished he could have its view. After a few more deep breaths, he closed his visor and gave the order to blow the horns. The sound of a dozen northern war horns filled the valley, as men immediately started marching towards the castle. The sound of hundreds of boots marching quickly replaced the dying tunes of the horns. It was an impressive sight, and he still couldn't believe that they were under his control. The wooden ram was brought forth, while Carstark and Glover men ran towards the gates with ropes and ladders of their own. The initial men were welcomed by the defenders with a hailstorm of arrows. Many men fell, but others immediately took their place. He halted his own contingent of men just outside of arrow range. There was no need for even more casualties. The ram slowly made its way towards the gate, while arrows, stones and other projectiles flew past the attackers pushing it. He saw many a good northerner fall, but the ram never stopped moving. Soon the Carstarks and Glovers were seen scaling the walls, and the sound of clashing steel was soon heard above everything else. The ram inched closer and closer towards the gate. It was clearly being targeted by the defenders, although its rain of projectiles had lessened now that their troops were attacking the walls. He and his men waited until the ram slowly reached the portcullis, some 20 feet in front of the gate. The defenders had lowered it, and soon the clangs of wood on iron were heard. Still his countrymen fell, as the defenders used the murder holes at the gate to full effect. In the meantime, he saw how more and more men were scaling the walls. It became clear that the Carstarks had managed to capture parts of the wall already, and the Glovers weren't too far behind to do the same. There was nothing he could do for them, and his eyes turned to the gates once more. Soon the sound of iron twisting could be heard, as the hardened wooded tip of the ram pounded on it relentlessly. Suddenly, out of a hole above it, boiling oil came down upon the attackers. The screams of the men cut straight to the bone and he shivered slightly. Still other soldiers took their place and the ram was pushed again against the iron bars. After what seemed like an age, his men got through the thin portcullis and were clearing the twisted pieces of iron from the ram's path towards the main gate. He knew that a possible trap could have been laid in the gatehouse, so he kept his men back for now. After a while, his men in front had cleared the iron and pushed the ram to the front of the gate. To his horror, he had been right. Another portcullis was suddenly dropped in front of the gate and there the whole story repeated itself again. More boiling oil was dropped upon the northern soldiers as they positioned the ram. Now they were a little better prepared, having their shields up and being able to jump out of the way. Still, some screams could be heard from the men that had been right below the hole from where it was dropped. He started to worry, as the ram still hadn't made contact with the gate. He started looking around and saw that the fighting on the walls had lessened considerably, with around half of it having been secured by either glovers or castocks. He suddenly saw how fighting broke out in one of the towers above the gate. Maybe they can open the gate. He thought hopefully, and sure enough he saw how the second portcullis was raised from the inside not long after. Still, the gate remained closed and his men pushed the ram against it for the first time. The pounding of wood on wood sounded like music to his ears as too many men were already lost in the attack. It seemed like most of the defenders had been cleared out of the gatehouse, as the ram now freely pounded away. Soon the sound of splintering wood was heard, as he and his men waited for the inevitable fall of the gate. After what felt like an age, a sickening crunch could finally be heard, as the battered door slammed open. "Forwards, men! Attack!" he screamed as he charged at the front. He ran under the gatehouse, sword and shield in hand, and screamed for Winterfell, for the north. The war cry was taken up by hundreds of men behind him as he and Ghost ran through the gate into the courtyard. He arrived in the middle of a fierce melee, as he saw how the vanguard had clashed with the Susfield troops. To his surprise he saw how many free soldiers were also pouring in from the left, as they fought their way towards the keep. Ghost ran past him and jumped an unsuspecting Westerlander knight in the back, mauling his neck until his head was severed from his body. All that remained of him, after a few seconds, was the blooded surcoat with the Susfield coat of arms on it. He ran after his direwolf and cleaved the hand of a guard that had wanted to pierce his companion with his halberd. He followed this up by slamming the pommel of his sword into the screaming guard's nose, before ending him with a slash across the neck. Hundreds of men came through the gate from behind him and pushed both attackers and defenders towards the keep. He was in the middle of the fight, as he blocked the axe of one defender with his shield and deflected the sword of another with his own. He slashed his sword up towards his second assailant, hitting him hard across his sword arm. He immediately turned around to block the attacker with the axe but saw how a free soldier had stabbed the man through the back. He turned back towards the other one and launched a quick succession of blows on his shield, before slashing at his knee. The guard fell to the ground and he put him out of his misery by piercing his neck with his blade. He looked around the courtyard and saw how the Westerlanders were falling like flies. They were simply being overrun. Suddenly shouting was heard from the steps of the keep. He saw an elder knight and a woman next to him, both dressed in Susfield colors, scream, and soon the remaining defenders laid down their weapons. "Who is it that leads this force?" the older man asked loudly with authority. He pushed his way through his men, a thing not too difficult when you were flanked by a direwolf almost the size of a pony. "I lead this force," he shouted out as he got close towards the keep and jumped up the stairs to what was probably the blacksmith. "May I have your name, my lord?" the elder knight asked. "My name is Jon Snow, brother to his grace Robb Stark, king in the north end of the Trident," he responded loudly, and the sight of Ghost even silenced the elder man in front of him. "May I have yours?" "My name is Sir Tyok Susfield, uncle to Lord Jason Susfield and Castellan of Susfield Castle," the man responded with a certain pride in his voice. "Do you surrender, Sir Tyok?" he simply replied. "Yes, we do. We surrender. Susfield is yours, Lord Snow," the knight admitted, and he nodded. Seeing Lord Flint in the masses below, he shouted towards him. "Lord Flint, have all soldiers that surrender here disarmed and brought to the dungeons. Put a heavy guard on them." Keep the knights separate in the courtyard. The middle-aged lord nodded and started directing his men. He looked around once more and saw Torren Carstark, who had probably come down from the walls to help in the courtyard. Torren, you and Harry will do the same to the remaining defenders on the walls. As Torren left with a nod, he saw the Great Yon arrive in the courtyard with some of his men. Lord Umber, you secure all the buildings in the castle. I don't want any surprises. Have all the servants searched, confiscate any weapons you may find and make it clear who controls this castle now. The Umber Lord grunted and shouted to his arriving men to start entering the buildings. Finally, he shouted at the mass of troops in the middle. 50 Stark guards with me, all others may rest. You deserved it, men, go celebrate your victory. He shouted, emphasizing the last word. A sound of cheers and shouts of victory erupted from the army, as soldiers started walking out. He waited for a few seconds until some of the Stark guards had joined him, before walking up to the keep. He walked up the stairs to the old Castellan. He looked to him and the young timid woman beside him and only now saw that she was clutching a baby in her arms. Sir, my lady, I promise you that you and your family will not be harmed. The old knight nodded in thanks. May I present you to Lady Johanna Sarsfield, wife of Sir Tyland Sarsfield, heir to Lord Jason and her newly born daughter, Sarissa Sarsfield. It is a pleasure, my lady. He responded with a slight bow. He knew how much these houses cared for decorum and everything that facilitated a smooth takeover of the castle was worth doing. Would you be so kind to tell me who else of the Sarsfield family is in the castle? Lord Jason and Sir Tyland are away with Lord Tywine. Lord Jason's remaining young children are inside of the castle with his brother's wife, my daughter and my grandchildren. His brother Sir Melwyn was leading the defense at the gatehouse, while my son-in-law was holding the northern wall. Sir Tyok responded, grimacing a little at the mention of his nephew and son-in-law leading the troops. He would too, if he were him. The chance that Sir Melwyn was still alive was slim, to say the least. The chance his own son-in-law still lived with the Umbers as opponents was maybe even smaller. He simply nodded. If you would be so kind as to show me around the keep and introduce me to the rest of the family. He asked, although he made it clear that they had little choice. The Sarsfield knight nodded defeated and gestured for him to follow inside. 5 days later. He had called a meeting with his commanders. He was standing around a big round wooden table in the Sarsfield Solar with Lords Umber, Glover, Deddings and Flint. The other attendants were the Smallgen, Daisy Mormont, Lucas Blackwood, Sir Bryndon Tully, Ryman and Black Walder Free, the Slater and Harry on Carstark. All looked over the maps at hand, which showed the central and northern Westerlands in detail. He had found them in Lord Sarsfield's rooms and had immediately made good use of them. They showed the area in extraordinary detail and he could only thank the Sarsfields for their existence. By now the army had rested while the wounded were all treated and recovering well. It was time to plan their next move. He had already sent out small parties to force the surrender of all the small holdfasts less than half a day's ride from the keep and they had all come back successfully. Now the big decisions needed to be made. A rider has come from Roose Riswell this morning. He had been tasked by the king with raiding the entire area from Tarbeck Hall down to the coast. Everything between the river here, he said, as he pointed to the map. And these mountains. Considering the low number of troops that he had, he did surprisingly well. He managed to get to 15 miles from the coast. There he was reportedly turned back by a Westerlander force. The Westerlanders seemed to have been a combination of Lannisters from Casterly Rock and Prestus from Feast Fires, just over 1,000 men in total. Heavily outnumbered, Roose retreated and only suffered minor casualties in a few skirmishes with their vanguard. He sends word that he has retreated back to Tarbeck Hall and will march to Ashmark to join Rob when his troops are rested. He has managed to loot many villages, small towns and petty holdfasts along the way and mentions that he has made the Westerlands considerably poorer and our kingdom considerably richer. He explained. This was met a number of smiles, as the amount of riches they had gathered on this campaign was becoming a real fortune. The Lannisters finally marched then. Sir Bryndon asked, studying the map with a pensive expression on his face. Yes, they probably crossed a bridge here. He said, pointing to one of the 2 bridges north of Casterly Rock. The position Roose reported wasn't that far from the rock, so it isn't all that surprising. The Presta support came more as a shock to me, as I would have expected them to be dealing with Dom's raiding force. At this most men nodded. Could this leave Lannisport or feast fires open? Lord Deddings asked, his intentions clear. It could, yes. However, we are in no position to take advantage of it now. Before reaching Lannisport, we still have to go through the keep of House Stackspear at the very least. Leaving them open in our rear to sabotage our supply lines would be suicidal. This will give that force more than enough time to return. Same goes for feast fires, as we would first need to storm Case, to be able to take it. He responded. Again, most of his commanders hummed their agreement. It gave him confidence, knowing they agreed with his observations. What's the plan then? The Great Yon asked gruffly. He looked again towards the map. Lord Umber, you and Lord Glover, together with your combined men and those of House Slate, will start raiding the last remainders of the River Road. You will go up to the keep of House Stackspear. Your main task is to scout ahead. Try to get as much information about the Lannister army that's building up as you can. His Grace wants their strength assessed before making any moves. He explained, as he looked around the room. You'll have close to 1,000 men with you, so if you have a chance to surprise the castle and take it, go ahead, but it is no priority. However, you are explicitly ordered to never make a move without knowing where the Lannister army is. I don't want you and your force surprised and annihilated against the walls of an unimportant keep like the one of the Stackspears. Am I clear? He said as he looked seriously over to the Great Yon. The man just shrugged his shoulders and nodded. Lord Glover next to him nodded dutifully as always. The first objective is scouting, the second, as always in this gold-infested land, is raiding. So, take all you can and move it here to Sarsfield, before moving it on to Ashmark. He finished his orders. These last words earned him a grin of the Umber Giant and his son, while Galbart Glover had a small smile playing on his mouth. Both houses weren't exactly rich, the Glovers even a lot less so than the Umbers, so all coin, food and livestock stolen felt like a small victory to them, he knew. In the meantime, Lord Deddings has another mission. I was going through the Sarsfield's personal correspondence and I found out that they have a small secluded silver mine in the mountains to the south somewhere. My lord, you are to take 300 men and take all the silver you can carry with you back here. This earned him another grin from a lord, as Lord Deddings was still eager for revenge after losing his home and his family, and the silver could give him the ability to start rebuilding his lands. Sir Brynden will take 100 outriders and go east. He is to scout the river road towards the Golden Tooth. I want all information I can get on House Lefford and its lands. They have lost their lord at the fords and his only heir is his unmarried daughter. The chances that the house's hold on its lands is weak and we might be able to exploit it. The Blackfish quickly agreed and promised to get them all the information they needed. The rest of us will remain here for another week, before moving back to Ashmark with the army. The king wants to lead the next attack himself. We will take with us all the loot and wounded and leave only a small garrison of men which will join Lord Umber and Glover on their return to Ashmark. You are to burn the castle and make it impossible for them to use it against us in the near future. If you were to take Stackspear's keep, you are to do the same. He said as he looked at the two lords to the right of him once more. Both seemed to understand the objective. We will all gather at Ashmark. Lords Umber and Glover, as well as Sir Brynden, are expected to be back at Ashmark in 3 weeks. Domeric Bolton, Roose Roswell and Lady Mormont will also rejoin the main force there with their troops. From there we will strike at another castle under the command of His Grace. Are there any questions? He finished the plan he had worked out, partially by himself, partially with Robb, on the march to the ruins of Castle Maria. Can we expect there to be any more raiding opportunities on the march back? Black Walder asked arrogantly. His eyes shone with greed, as he was clearly thinking about more Lannister gold. Small parties will be sent out to both subdue any remaining Sarsfield vassals to the northeast and start small skirmishes on the border with House Lefford. However, no major targets or gains are to be expected though. He admitted honestly. The Free Knight nodded, and it was clear that he would ask him for one of the commands soon enough. Sir Rymon's second son was like nothing he had ever seen. The man was a ferocious and capable warrior, but a horrible man. Every time he was sent out, stories of horrible slaughter had reached back to him. Many rumors were said about the man, even by his own kin. If the stories were true, he was bedding half the twins. Allegedly, even the wives of his brothers and multiple of his cousins weren't safe from him, and many of his kin hated him almost as much as they feared him because of that. He ended the meeting and grabbed himself a glass of wine as all others left. It was an Arbor Gold, from a very nice vintage. It seemed the Sarsfields had expensive tastes. They had opened 2 of the barrels for the commanders after their victory, and there was still some left. The other ones would be lifted on crates and moved with the rest of the loot. He sat down in a chair as he drank deeply from the wine. He appreciated the taste, as it entered his throat. Rob never told him commanding would be so draining, he thought with annoyance. Still, he was happy with himself. He had done what he had to and was laying the foundations for the next step. What that step was for Rob to decide. More than 2 weeks later. Rob. The bulk of his army had returned yesterday afternoon. The Ruswells and Mormonts had arrived earlier, and soon his army would soon be complete again. They were only waiting for Dom and Lords Glover and Umber now. The reunions in the force had been heartwarming, especially the one between Daisy and her mother. It was the first time they saw each other after getting the news of what happened to Lionel. The reunions he had looked most forward to were between himself and his brothers, by marriage or blood. John had done very well. It had been a difficult assault, but he managed to get the castle. He also discovered another silver mine and looted it and brought with him some looted livestock. The vaults in Ashmark were overflowing and he didn't know what to do with it anymore. He had ordered the loot to be counted, and they had come to the conclusion that they had almost 2 million golden dragons worth in gold, silver, trinkets and wine here now. To that sum you still had to add a huge amount of livestock and the loot now being brought with the different army groups. He had already fantasized what could be done with that amount of coin. He could finish his father's plans with it. Build out the road system across the whole north, even to the wall. He could start rebuilding Moat Cailin when they got it back from the Ironborn. Maybe he could even think of building a keep on the west coast to protect the Stony Shore or Sea Dragon Point. However, he knew he had to temper his expectations. Most of the coin would need to go to rebuilding the Riverlands and paying for the army. The remnants would need to be split amongst his vassals as well, but that wasn't a bad thing. It would allow the North to better prepare itself for the coming winter and allow more people to survive it. His father had always been clear that winter, and the loss of people that it brought with it, was the biggest threat to northern prosperity. More people needed to survive to repopulate and strengthen certain areas like the Gift, the Stony Shore or the territory around Moat Cailin. All information indicated that, due to the unusual long summer, there had been an unusual high birth rate and survival rate for children the last decade. If he managed to enlarge the North's food import and places for shelter, he might be able to save most of this generation and put those children to good use in later years of his reign as they came of age. That were all things his father had been laying the groundwork for. He had even started with Moat Cailin, by establishing it as a supply post and allowing some small settlements nearby. The Ironborn had destroyed it all though, and by plundering and murdering they had also further depopulated the western coast. It would need a lot of work and take multiple decades, but, together with the years of planning his father had done, he thought he could maybe start to change the situation for the better, due to the funds he got here. This and more had been constantly on his mind this last month, and he had discussed much of it with OS, who had stayed behind as Castellan of Ashmark. It seemed that OS had a real talent in stewardship and he was a great help to him in discussing his ideas. He had also spent a lot of time with Roderick Dustin, his very distant cousin of some sort. Roderick knew a lot of the trade and roads within the north. His family's business focused on trade between Barrowton, Russia, Torrens Square and Flint's Fingers, and he told him much of the roads, towns and villages that lay in between. He had also talked very enthusiastically about what his father had been doing in Moat Cailin. He said it had even given the incentive to start thinking about more trade between White Harbor and Barrowton. He was determined to re-implement everything his father had done and more, right after they got rid of the Ironborn. Be that as it may, they needed to win a war first. The last week he had spent dozens of hours above maps, books and scout reports about the Westerlands. When he had heard that John had sent Sir Brynden and the Great Yon to scout out the Golden Tooth and Lannisport, he had smiled. His brother knew he was still undecided about where to attack, and he was gathering him more information to make his decision. Together with Dom's report from Case and Feast Fires, he would have more than enough to decide upon their next plan. Harry and To had also outdone themselves, the latter even leading a small raiding force of his own for a few days on their return march. It was those three people, his brothers, that disturbed his thought process when they entered. He had invited them to spend some time together, as he had missed their company. He also wanted their opinions in private, on the campaign but also the home front and the Tywin Lannister situation. They sat at a small table together, as Ghost and Grey Wind lay next to the fire crackling in the hearth. They talked for over an hour about many things, from childhood stories to intricate political situations. Harry had been very interested in the situation of House Hornwood, while Tom made them laugh multiple times with anecdotes from when they were younger. Jon talked about the difficulties of his own command and the things he had noticed among the nobles. It was one of the nicest afternoons he had had in weeks. This all changed, when a knock on the door was heard. "The Maester is here, Your Grace. A letter has arrived from Winterfell," he says. One of his trusted guardsmen called out, "Let him in." He responded, eager for news from his wife and family. The bald, aging Maester entered and looked around the room to his companions. After a second or two, he bowed and handed him the letter. He thanked the man but waited until he had left before breaking the direwolf seal. He had learned too much about the Westerling Maester to fully trust others here in the West. "To King Robb, to my husband," he read at the top of the parchment. The letters were written in the clear handwriting of Maester Lewin, but the words were clearly from Alis. This confused him. Had something happened that she couldn't write anymore? He quickly read on, trying to make sense of this observation. "I dictate this letter to Maester Lewin, as I am sadly unable to write it myself. I am still bedridden after giving birth to our beautiful child 3 days ago. The birth was long and difficult, but I pulled through and I am recovering perfectly. I send this letter to inform you that you are a father now, Robb. You are a father to a beautiful and healthy baby girl. She has grey-blue eyes, which your mother informs me remind her of your Uncle Benjen a bit. Her hair is brown in color, although in certain light a reddish shine can be seen in it. Her face is long, like mine, your father's and Arya's. She is everything we could ever hope for and more. Her length and weight are average and the Maester informs me she is a perfectly healthy baby. I have named our daughter Eddara, after your father and my brother. I hope you agree on the name, as we hadn't discussed any. I wanted to honor the people we both lost and that we miss every day. Your family seems to love both her and the name. Your mother dotes on her granddaughter and her birth seems to have rejuvenated Lady Catelyn. Sansa cares for her little niece as everyone would expect, but it is Arya who surprises everyone. Your little sister seems to almost always be in Eddara's presence now. That's getting better, and Nymeria is as protective of her as of Arya herself. Bran tells me it is because our daughter shares the Stark look, like Arya, and that she feels connected with her because of it. Your brothers visit Eddara every day. Bran has started to tell her stories already, although it seems Rickon likes them more than she does. We all miss you, and when you come home, both your girls will be waiting for you. Your loving wife, Alis Stark, Queen in the North End of the Trident." He stared at the paper as he read the words again and again. "I am a father. I have a daughter and she is named Eddara." The emotions that washed over him were like something he never felt before. From the corner of his eye, he saw a tear drop upon the parchment. Was he crying? He just stared at the words, over and over again. Suddenly, he was pulled back to his surroundings as he felt Jon's hand on his shoulder. "What is Robb?" he asked him. He looked at him, tears clouding his sight. I am a father now." He almost whispered, but it was loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. He felt something along his side, and as he looked down, he saw how Grey Wind was hugging him. When he looked into the direwolf's eyes, his companion understood. He could swear the wolf looked happy for him, as he licked his hand. "A father. Did Alis give birth? How's she? Is everything good with her and the baby?" Harry, the concerned older brother, immediately fired questions in rapid succession. He could only nod, as he handed his brother-in-law the letter. The Karstark brothers read through it, while John hugged him fiercely. "You will be a great father, Rob. Your child will grow up healthy and surrounded by family." He comforted him. "Is it a boy or a girl?" his brother asked in his ear, neither of them loosening the hug. "A girl," he responded. He felt his brother smile. "That will obviously please your mother and Sansa, but who knows, maybe she'll be a little she-wolf like Arya," his brother said, and his grin was clear. "She looks like you and Arya, apparently," he responded, the words sounding far away. John pulled back slightly so he could look into his eyes. "She looks like father then." He nodded and said, "There is more, John." Alis called her Edara. They just looked at each other in silence, before his brother nodded with a sad smile and hugged him again. He would have loved that, Rob. He would be so proud of it. Both stayed like that for a while, as John and Ghost joined in next to them and they petted their wolves. When they finally broke free, he turned around. He looked to the Karstark brothers and both smiled sadly to him. His daughter was also called after the brother they had lost, a man he had always considered his own brother. He hugged both Harry and To, and after another heartfelt moment between them, Harry called out, "This deserves a toast. To Princess Edara Stark, the first of Rob's and Alis many children," he said loudly, as he winked at him at the end. It does. A toast would be welcome," John said from behind him. To joined in. He opened the door with a smile and the guards looked weirdly at him. Then he realized his eyes were still full of tears. He laughed it off and asked the man, "Beric, bring us the best wine you can find in this damned castle and some cups to go along with. While you're at it, get some cups for you and Windle here too. There is cause for celebration." Surprised, the guard, Beric, looked at him. "Celebration, your grace? What are we celebrating?" "I'll tell you when you come back with the wine, unless you don't want any luxurious wine to drink." He laughed at the man. The guard raised his eyebrows a little, before grinning. "Already on my way, your grace," the veteran soldier said, as he turned around with a small bow and walked with great strides towards the direction of the wine cellar and the servants. He looked to his left at Windle and smiled at the guard. "Thank you for your generosity, your grace," the soldier said with a genuine smile. "Call on me when Beric arrives, I'll tell you what we're celebrating then," he responded with a chuckle, as he turned around and shut the door again with a smile. "Sharing our expensive wines with the guards now, Redstock." To teased him, but he laughed it off. "They have almost as much to celebrate as we do, little brother. Their princess has been born. The first princess born in the north in 300 years. Harry said meaningfully, as he clapped his brother on the shoulder. He looked strangely at Harry after those words. He knew them to be true, but it still surprised him. The first princess born in 300 years. He just had to make sure it wasn't the last. He thought back on the letter and on Winterfell, and fear started to creep up on him. What if the Ironborn returned? What if any of his enemies got to Winterfell? What would happen to his daughter then? Grey Wind immediately noticed his discomfort and trotted over towards him. He nuzzled his head in his chest and he grabbed it gratefully, as the wolf soothed some of his fears. He squatted down and let the wolf lick his head and nuzzle his face. It seemed that Ghost had also noticed it as he slowly walked over towards him with John. He looked up towards his brother and simply asked, "Is it worth it, John? Is it worth it fighting this war and getting them in danger?" John looked at him and sighed. Yes it is, Rob. If we don't win here, we'll never be safe. Tywin Lannister will never forget what we did here. We need to end him and his cause, or your daughter will never be safe. None of us or our families will ever be safe if Tywin or his spawn remain in power. We need to finish this, and it is the just thing to do. They put their incest bastard on the throne, killed father and many other innocent people. We need to bring them to justice. He looked up at his brother once more and nodded. John was right. He would end Tywin and go home to meet his daughter. No one would come between that meeting, he decided. He had to survive and win this war so he could go home to his family, and he would. He hugged both wolves for a while more, as Ghost had joined his brother in helping him. When a knock on the door was heard, he stood up and thanked Grey Wind and Ghost for their support. He also promised them a big piece of meat later and both seemed to like that. He walked up to the dark wooden doors and opened them wide. Beric stood there with a big smile. He had brought a servant along with him and they carried 3 bottles of arbor red and 6 glasses. He thanked the Westerlander servant and let him go on his way, as he and Tob behind him accepted the bottles. He looked over them, they were from a very old and expensive vintage. Good, the occasion called for it and better he drank it than the Mar brands. He opened the first bottle and poured the 6 glasses out. He gave 2 of them to his loyal guards and Tob gave the others 1 as well. He raised his glass slowly. "To what are we drinking, your grace?" Beric asked. He looked meaningfully at his guard, who was probably having the best guard duty of his life. "We are celebrating the birth of my daughter, Princess Edara Stark." He smiled, as he tasted the sound of the name in his mouth. He decided he liked it. Both guards looked stunned at him, before grinning widely. Both had served under his father and were fiercely loyal to his house and they seemed genuinely happy because of the news. I'll drink to that, your grace," Windle said respectively as he slightly lowered his head. "To the princess." "To the princess," all of his friends said in chorus and they drank heavily. The wine was dry but very good and he let the taste savor in his mouth. He was a father now. He said to himself, as the truth finally started sinking in. Chapter 32, The North Strikes Back. 299 AC. Bran. He walked through the halls of his home. He whistled an old song old Nan had taught him when he was younger. He had only learned to whistle a few weeks ago by his friend Alin. Since then he couldn't and wouldn't stop anymore. He rounded the corner and came upon the nursery. As he entered, he saw Arya standing there with little Edara in her arms. Jonelle was watching them with her youngest Edric in her arms. Her other 2 children, Lion and Martin, were playing in the corner with Rukan and some of his new toys. He greeted Jonelle happily and said hello to his little brother and the Castles, before walking over to his sister and niece. It was funny to see them together, as they looked somewhat alike. At first, he had been a little jealous of that, but his mother had comforted him. She reminded him that he and his other brothers and sister looked like her and Arya had felt quite alone because she didn't. Arya deserved to have someone that looked like her and little Edara was pretty. There was John, but he was south with Rob so that didn't really count as they were never here. He smiled at Arya as he softly caressed little Edara's head. "Do you want to sit down? I can tell her another story," he asked his sister. She nodded and sat down in a wicker chair at the other side of the room. As she sat down, she hit her arm against the chair. He saw an expression of pain go through her, but it left just as quickly as it came. He knew his sister was still healing from the attack and hoped she would be okay. He sat down in the chair next to her and called for Rukan. He and Lionel Castle quickly ran over with little Martin waggling behind his older sister. Jonelle sat down with Edric below their chairs and put both her sons in her lap while Lion and Rukan sat next to her. "I will tell you the story of the Simon Star Eyes," he said with a smile and his little brother smiled back. The next day, he ran across the inner battlements with Alin as they both enjoyed the light snowfall. The snow was not really sticky enough to have a snowball fight with, but that didn't discourage them from trying. He laughed as Alin grabbed some snow from a nearby melon on the wall and threw it at him. It had dissolved in the air and the wind had blown all the snow particles in his friend's face. He even heard a guard chuckle at the sight, some ways to the left. Alin just shrugged and joined in after he had cleared most of the snow from his face. After a while, they looked over the battlements to the winter town in the distance. It had changed much in the last few weeks. A reinforced wooden palisade had been erected around the town and 3 small gatehouses had been built. Craftsmen were still working on the large gates, but they would soon be ready. One thing that he had noticed was that the palisade had been built some ways off the edge of the current buildings, as if it was expected the town would grow. Alice, his mother and Sir Roderick had been implementing these changes, and many others, ever since the attack happened. His mother hadn't joined in much at the beginning, he had noticed. After Arya got better, she started taking care of her tasks a lot more and that was really good timing as Alice gave birth soon after. They sort of switched positions like that. He liked it like that, because that meant there were less discussions happening. Lord Harley's was also still here and he helped his family a lot, for which he was glad. He quite liked the head of House Hornwood, even if he often looked at him with sadness in his eyes. Mother had whispered to him that it had nothing to do with him. He apparently reminded Lord Hornwood of his son Darren, who had died fighting with Rob in the Riverlands. Lord Harley's helped out with a lot of things and had lead men out of Winterfell twice already. They had patrolled along the Wolfswood villages sworn to his family. To their relief, only one had been attacked and burned out by the Ironborn attackers on their retreat. He had heard Sir Roderick tell they had marched north towards Deepwood Motte. The castle knight had inspected the progress on the palisade every 2 days until the work had been finished. Even now he still checked on the gatehouses regularly. A small town guard of 50 men was established and was being trained within the castle. Soon they would patrol the palisade. Until then Sir Roderick has sent men from the castle's garrison there. The garrison itself was also being expanded and the new guards joined the watchmen in training every morning. The drills Sir Roderick and Lord Harley's gave them every morning were impressive to see, and sometimes he and Alan snuck off to the Godswood to try and imitate the guards' moves with their stolen practice swords. It was really fun, but most of the times they were caught before reaching the safety of the hearth tree. Once a week, the whole levy that was stationed at Winterfell joined the exercises. Seeing hundreds of men in Stark and Hornwood colours was very impressive to see. Lord Harley's had told him they needed to stay sharp for when they would march on the Ironborn. He had entrusted him that they could march soon if an opportunity presented himself. Mayor Stillowin had told him houses Sewin, Flint, Dustin, Locke and Marndale were also drilling their men. Soon they could unite and march on the Greyjoy forces. Another army of mountain clansmen was closing in on Deepwood Motte every day now, he knew. Apparently, some Umbers were also joining them after Alera had died. Lord Harley's had grunted they want revenge, and rightfully so. He looked towards Alan together and they went back to playing. After a while, he missed Summer and went to search for him. Maybe he's in the Godswood. His friend asked helpfully. No, I think he's with Nymerie right now. How do you know? Alan asked surprised. He shrugged. I just do. He didn't wait for his friend's reply and ran down the stairs into the courtyard. He heard his friend race behind him. The last one at Arya's room is slower than a free. He called out towards his friend with a laugh. He hoped the two Walders hadn't heard him, but he didn't really care. They were mean and nobody liked them. If even a famous knight like his uncle Brynden disliked House Free, then all of them were probably stupid. He reached the keep first and ran inside. He took the stairs 2 at a time and was sure he would win the race when he suddenly knocked into someone. He fell onto the ground, although his fall was broken by the person he had hit. Confused, he looked up. All color in his face quickly drained as he recognized his own mother. Brandon Stark, what is the meaning of this? She scolded him, just as Alan came running up the stairs. You boys should not be running like that, especially not in here. He felt so embarrassed that he could only nod, as his face felt hot. He was probably as red as his hair by now. Alan also looked baffled and excused himself quickly. His mother stood up and dignified herself before looking at them sternly. As punishment, both you boys will help me with my work tomorrow. Your lessons will be rescheduled to the rest of the week and the time will be taken from your free hours. Am I clear? He nodded. He didn't like it one bit, but it could have been worse, so he held his tongue. Alan looked more annoyed, but he also nodded and responded with a yes, my lady. Mother seemed pleased with that at least, as she walked past him down the stairs. Summer is inside, you'll want to see him. I'll see you at dinner, she said without turning around. When she was gone, he and Alan looked at each other. Almost no free time this week. Really, just for running around. At home my brothers and I did nothing else. I know. He responded sadly. If we manage to do well in our lessons, Mayor Stillowin and Sir Roderick might give us some more free time to sneak off to. He proposed. His friend nodded. It's worth a shot, at least. Now go find your oversized pet. He grinned. He smiled back and turned around, eager to see Summer. 3 days later. Harley's Hornwood. He was sitting in the Stark Solar. In front of him sat Queen Alis and Lady Catelyn. The queen still looked weak from giving birth, so they had decided to keep this short. Together with Sir Roderick and Maester Lewin they had gathered to discuss the news that had come from Deepwood Motte. The clansmen had arrived and managed to attack the Ironborn. Instead of attacking them head-on, they had circled around the enemy and attacked their ships. They had managed to burn them all and had killed around 100 Ironborn in the attack. Apparently, the idea had come from Hodder Umber, who had joined the clans with over 100 grey-bearded veterans on horseback. He was looking for revenge for the death of his great-niece and was certain to get it. His plan was clear, now the Ironborn had nowhere to escape to. The Greyjoys had realized that too, as they had lifted the siege and disappeared inside the Wolf's Wood. This pleased him greatly. The clans and Umbers had joined up with a few Glover scouts and were already hot on their heels. They knew those woods as the back of their hand. The Greyjoys didn't stand a change and it was only a matter of time until they were caught now. The letter also told him of Lance. His bastard son was fine, just as the Glover family. He would be sent to Winterfell with a guard once the Greyjoy forces were destroyed. This filled his heart with joy. It would give his house a much-needed heir, but most of all he longed to see his estranged son again. He had thought of him daily, ever since he returned to the north. "Will you move to intercept the Greyjoys?" Lady Catelyn asked him and Sir Roderick. "No, my lady. I don't feel the need to do so," he replied. This got him surprised looks from both his lady and his queen. "No need to?" Her Grace asked. "No, your Grace. The clans and Umbers outnumber the Greyjoys almost 3 to 1. They have the support of the local population and are properly provisioned and organized while the Greyjoys lost a lot of their supplies with their ships. Most importantly, the clans have Glover guides. I know some of these men, they belong to the clans of the Wolf's Wood. No men, living or dead, know those parts as well as they do. The Greyjoys simply have no chance. Before long they will be ambushed and reduced to nothing. The survivors will be hunted by the local clans and none of them will see their damned islands ever again, I'm afraid," he stated matter-of-factly. He thought of men like Ned Woods and Rickard Bole and almost pitied the Ironborn stuck in those woods. This seemed to shock most of the other attendants, only Sir Roderick looked deep in thought. After a while the knight added, I think Lord Harley's has the truth of it. I've known some of those men briefly during the wars I served under Lord Stark. Those men know their craft. I think that only the Crannog men are better in ambushes and no one beats them in hunting. Be it deer or man, I see no difference. The Ironborn might endure for some time, but they will never make it. Their only real hope is Moat Cailin and they will never make it over there. Even if they try, we can still block them here around Winterfell. Their second possibility is their ships along the Stony Shore, although they will never be able to carry all of them to their home. I suspect they will try nonetheless, certainly when they start bleeding manpower in the Wolf's Wood. I propose we send word to the Ryswells and Tall Hearts to be on high alert and to send out scouts to locate their ships on the Stony Shore. Even if they manage to get through, which is highly unlikely, we can still track them there." Now the Queen smiled. "That sounds perfect. Thank you both. I promise you that you and your family's sacrifices will not be forgotten. House Stark remembers and rewards its most loyal subjects. I live to serve, my queen." Sir Roderick immediately responded in his gruff but loyal tone. "House Hornwood serves the Starks of Winterfell, your grace, now and always," he added seriously. Now it was Lady Catelyn's turn to smile. "Thank you. You both served my husband and even his father loyally. Seeing you do the same for my son fills me with gratitude. As Her Grace said, we will not forget it." He just nodded in his head in thanks and Sir Roderick did the same. Rob. Finally, all his troops were united once more. Well, if you didn't count the garrison of Freys in the crag, but he rather liked it without them here. 5,000 men were once again under his control. Most of them loyal and veteran Northmen, the rest equally veteran Riverlanders. He couldn't wait to announce his plans to his lords and march, but there was something he needed to do first. He had to confront the Great Yon about his deeds and he didn't like it one bit. At least it helped that no other acts of cruelty had taken place while he was under Jon's command. He sat down at the wooden desk in Ashmark Solar. He positioned ice in the left corner and Grey Wind to his right and waited on the giant lord's arrival while thinking of the words he wanted to say to him. At last, a knock was heard on the door. "Lord Umber is here to see you, your grace," Desmond called out while sticking his head between the door. "Thank you, Desmond. Let him in." The guard nodded loyally and the great Jon strode in the solar not long after. "You wanted to see me, your grace." The man boomed all confidence until he looked around the room. "Yes, Lord Umber, please take a seat," he responded cordially, giving nothing away. "Lord Umber is it now, huh? What's this about then?" His father's friend replied gruffly, although he did as he was asked. "Reports have reached us of your behavior while having your own command. Do the villages of White Sept and Colwish ring a bell?" he said evenly, while looking in his eyes. "Fie, so that's what this is about." The man scoffed, as he straightened himself before continuing. "They were our enemies, I gave them what they deserved. I could have been a bit more delicate, but this is war. You kill your enemies, that's what I did. I obeyed all your orders and took out all targets and even more. I think my command was quite successful." The great Jon defended himself. "You are not here because of your effectiveness on campaign, or your qualities for command. Both of us know you are a very capable commander and you did well in securing all the objectives I gave you," he replied honestly. The man in front of him was one of his best commanders, that was without a doubt. If he could rein in his rashness, he could even be an exceptional one. He could see the great Jon nod and agree with what he had said, seemingly pleased at the praise for his objective. "But, you did not obey all my orders. On the contrary, you clearly disobeyed one. I told you and all my commanders I didn't want too many civilian deaths, especially not women and children. You slaughtered 2 whole villages, maybe even more if you count the small farmsteads you passed along the way. That kind of insubordination can't stand. Nor do I want to be seen as another Tywin Lannister who burns and destroys everything he wishes just because he can," he continued firmly. Now Lord Umber jumped up. "Your Grace, I did everything you asked and more. I took out all you wanted me to take, after which I followed your brother faithfully. Together we took Sarsfield and after that Galbart and I even managed to take Stackspear in a night attack as well. Took the whole castle by surprise, bringing you even more prisoners and loot than I already did. I burned down the villages and let my men hurt their small folk, but that was only after I heard my daughter died for fuck's sake. Any man would have needed an outlet at that time. I took it out on the enemy, as you do in war." The man bellowed as he rose to his full length. He patiently let the man finish, knowing he wouldn't actually hurt him however scary he might look. When he looked finished, he only replied with 5 words while scratching Grey Wind's head. His direwolf growled lightly when he spoke. "Lord Umber, sit down, now," he said as he emphasized the last word greatly. The great Jon looked surprised at him and glanced between him and his direwolf. Realizing that he was not joking, the lord sat back down again. He wanted to speak again but he raised his hand. "Now concerning what you said. You did great in your individual tasks, under Jon and together with Lord Galbart, and I thank you for it as it greatly helps our cause. However, that doesn't mean you don't deserve to be punished for your other deeds," he began. "The fact of Alera's passing is the only reason we are having this conversation in private instead of in a meeting with all other lords. Do you understand?" he added seriously. Seeing the giant man nod silently, he continued. "That you needed an outlet and took it out upon the enemy is understandable, but, even if so, your conduct was unacceptable. Your own son, the man who looks most like you in this whole world, needed the same. He immediately asked me for a command when he heard. I gave it to him, and he did take it out on the enemy as you should have. Could Smalljon have acted more honorably? Yes, and I might have liked it more, but he didn't cross any of the lines you did. No mentions of rapes or murders of innocent women and children, a thing I explicitly stated I would never agree with. I will never tolerate it, not then and not now. We are not Lannisters, do you hear me?" The giant man looked at him silently. They locked eyes for a long time before he finally relented. I do. Your Grace." "Good. Now because of the circumstances and because you did so well on the campaign you will come away with this with a warning only. If this happens ever again you will be stripped of all command and sent towards the infantry to serve under Lord Carstark. House Umber has shown itself very loyal and as such its place will never be open to discussion. Your honored position will be given to either your son or brother. Smalljan has shown himself capable and loyal and he could lead in your place, so could Roderick. Your house will never be shamed as I owe you much, but you can be replaced if you do not follow my orders. Do you understand? He finished, the threat clearly hanging in the air. He considered the Umbers his most loyal bannermen, just after the Carstarks. Shaming them would be a horrible mistake, but that didn't mean he could not put the Great Yon in his place, and the man needed to realize this. He looked at the Lord and awaited his response.